Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name's Ephraim Tolliver. I'm 41 years old, and I've been hauling freight through the Appalachians for the better part of 16 years. I know these mountains the way some men know their own backyards. Every curve, every grade, every tunnel that cuts through rock older than anyone's great-grandparents. I've driven through ice storms that turned the windshield into a wall of white static, through fog so thick you couldn't see your own hood, and through nights so quiet you could hear your own heartbeat over the engine hum. None of it ever shook me. Not really. Not until that February run through the Blue Ridge when I started seeing the same mile marker twice. It started with a simple job. I was contracted to haul construction equipment from a depot outside Charleston over to a site near Beckley. Steel beams, hydraulic jacks, nothing unusual. The load was heavy but balanced, and the weather forecast looked clear enough. Cold, sure, but no precipitation. I left the depot around 7 in the evening, figuring I'd make the delivery by dawn if I kept a steady pace. The dispatcher told me to take Route 19 north and then cut through the old tunnel system near Fayetteville. It's a shortcut most drivers avoid because the tunnels are narrow and the lanes don't leave much room for error. But I'd been through them before. No issues. Just keep your speed down, stay centered, and don't let your mind wander. The first hour was uneventful. Traffic was light, mostly locals heading home from work. I passed through a couple of small towns where the streetlights barely reached the road, where gas stations closed at 6, and the only thing open was a diner with a flickering neon sign. I stopped at one of those diners, grabbed a cup of coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since morning, and used the restroom. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes and a name tag that said Irene, asked where I was headed. I told her Beckley through the tunnels. She paused for a second, wiping down the counter with a rag that had seen better days, and said, "You be careful through there. Roadwork's been going on for weeks. They got lane closures, weird scheduling. Heard some folks got turned around in the dark." I thanked her, left a tip, and got back on the road. Her words stuck with me, though. Not because they scared me, but because they felt oddly specific. Like she knew something she wasn't saying. I shook it off. People in small towns always have stories about the roads, about the mountains, about things that happen in the dark. Most of it's just talk. Ghost stories to pass the time. By the time I reached the approach to the tunnel system, it was close to 9:30. The sky had gone from dusk to full dark, and the mountain ridges on either side of the highway looked like black cutouts against a slightly lighter sky. No moon, no stars. Just a kind of heavy darkness that pressed down on everything. The road started to climb, winding upward through dense forest. Pine trees crowded the edges, their branches reaching out over the pavement like they were trying to touch the yellow line. My headlights carved a narrow tunnel of light ahead of me, and beyond that, nothing. Just the road disappearing into shadow. I passed a reflective green sign that read, "Tunnel ahead, reduce speed, construction zone." Below it, a smaller placard with the symbol for a single-lane closure. I eased off the gas, brought the rig down to about 35. The engine noise dropped to a low growl, and the sound of the tires on asphalt became more pronounced. That's when I started to notice the silence. Not the usual kind of quiet you get on a back road at night. This was different, thicker, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. The tunnel entrance appeared ahead, a wide mouth of darkness framed by concrete and rusted steel. There were orange traffic cones set up in a line, funneling traffic into the left lane. A digital sign blinked. Right lane closed. Maintenance crew active. I didn't see any workers, no flashing lights, no equipment, just the cones and the sign. I slowed further, downshifted, and guided the rig into the open lane. The tunnel swallowed me whole. Inside, the air changed. It felt colder, damper, like I'd driven into a refrigerator. The overhead lights were spaced far apart, dim yellow bulbs that barely pushed back the shadows. The walls were rough, unfinished rock in some places, smooth concrete in others. I could hear the engine's echo bouncing back at me, layered and distorted. Every gear shift, every tap of the brake sounded louder than it should have. I kept my eyes on the road, watching the white line that marked the edge of the lane. The tunnel curved gently to the left, and as I followed it, I caught a glimpse of something in the side mirror. A flicker of movement, like someone had stepped out from one of the service alcoves cut into the wall. I looked again. Nothing. Just the empty lane behind me, the cones lined up in a perfect row. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the overhead bulbs, but my hands tightened on the wheel anyway. There's a feeling you get sometimes when you're alone in a place like that, a feeling that you're not quite as alone as you think. It's not fear, not yet, just awareness. A quiet alertness that sits in your chest and refuses to leave. I kept driving. The tunnel stretched on longer than I remembered. I'd been through here before, twice, maybe 3 times, and it had never felt this long. The echo of the engine seemed to stretch too, the sound bouncing in ways that didn't quite match the rhythm of the tires. I glanced at the odometer. I'd been inside for almost 2 minutes, maybe a little more. That felt about right, but something in the back of my mind whispered that it should have been less, that I should have seen the exit by now. Then I saw it. A mile marker, painted on the tunnel wall in faded white numbers, 187. I made a mental note of it, not because it meant anything specific, but because it gave me a point of reference. Something solid, a number I could hold on to. The tunnel continued, curving slightly to the right now, and the overhead lights seemed to dim even further. I reached for the radio, thinking I'd catch a weather update or maybe just some music to fill the silence. Static, pure, unbroken static. I turned the dial, flipping through every station I could find. Nothing, just white noise, crackling and hissing like something was interfering with the signal. I switched it off. The silence came back, heavier than before. I could hear my own breathing now, slow and steady, and the faint creak of the cab's suspension as the rig rolled forward. Then, just ahead, I saw the emergency phone. It was mounted on the wall inside a metal housing painted safety yellow, with a reflective sticker that said, "Emergency use only." I'd passed dozens of these over the years, never once had to use one. But as I drew closer, I noticed something strange. The housing door was open, hanging loose on its hinge. The phone itself was off the hook, dangling by its cord, swaying slightly like someone had just set it down. I slowed, almost stopped, but didn't. Something told me not to stop. Not here, not now. I kept my eyes forward and pressed the accelerator just enough to maintain speed. The phone passed out of view, and I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding my ribs together by sheer will. I loosened my grip on the wheel, rolled my shoulders, tried to shake off the tension. Just a maintenance issue, I told myself. Someone forgot to secure the housing, nothing more. And then I saw it again. Mile marker 187. The same number, painted on the wall in the same faded white letters. I blinked, stared at it, checked the odometer. I'd driven almost another mile since the first one. That didn't make sense. Mile markers don't repeat. They increment, one after another, marking distance in a straight line. But there it was, plain as day. 187. My heart started to beat faster, a dull thud that I could feel in my throat. I checked the mirrors again. The tunnel behind me looked the same. Empty lane, dim lights, rough walls. No sign of the cones, no sign of the entrance. Just tunnel. I turned my attention back to the road ahead, searching for the exit, for daylight, for anything that would tell me I was moving forward and not stuck in some kind of loop. The overhead lights flickered, once, twice, then steadied. The echo of the engine changed pitch, just slightly, like the tunnel had grown larger or the walls had moved back. I kept driving. What else could I do? Stop? Turn around? There was no room to turn around, and stopping felt like the worst possible option. So I drove, and the tunnel went on, and the silence pressed down like a weight on my shoulders. I started counting the overhead lights as they passed, using them as a measure of distance. 1, 2, 3, 4. At the fifth light, I saw the service alcove. It was set back into the wall on the right side, a narrow recess maybe 6 feet deep with a steel door at the back. The door was rusted, streaked with orange and brown, and it looked like it hadn't been opened in years. But as I passed, I caught a glimpse of something inside the alcove. A shape, tall and dark, standing perfectly still. I didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't even turn my head for a second look. I just kept my foot steady on the pedal and watched the alcove shrink in the side mirror until it disappeared into the shadows. My hands were shaking now, just a little, and I gripped the wheel tighter to stop it. The temperature inside the cab seemed to drop, and I could see my breath misting in front of me. I reached for the heater, cranked it up, but the air that came through the vents felt cold and damp, like it was being pulled from somewhere deep underground. Then the radio crackled to life. No music, no voices, just a low hum that rose and fell in a slow rhythm. It sounded almost like breathing, deep and wet, like someone exhaling through water. I slapped the power button, shutting it off hard enough that the knob broke off in my hand. The silence rushed back in, and with it came a new sound. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Footsteps, metal on concrete. Slow, deliberate, echoing from somewhere behind me. I checked the mirror, nothing. Just the empty tunnel, the lights fading into darkness. But the sound continued, keeping pace with the rig, matching my speed exactly. I pressed the accelerator, pushed the rig up to 40. The footsteps quickened. I eased off, dropped back to 30. The footsteps slowed. My pulse hammered in my ears, drowning out everything else. I wanted to scream, to punch the dashboard, to do something to break the grip of whatever this was, but I didn't. I just drove, and the tunnel kept stretching, and the footsteps kept following. Finally, after what felt like an hour, but was probably only minutes, I saw it. A faint glow ahead, pale and cold, like the light you get just before dawn. The exit. I gunned it, pushing the rig as hard as I dared, and burst out of the tunnel into the open air. The cold hit me like a slap, and I sucked in a lungful of it, gasping like I'd been underwater. I pulled onto the shoulder, killed the engine, and sat there, trembling, staring at the tunnel entrance in the mirror. It looked normal, just a dark opening in the mountainside, framed by concrete and cones. Quiet, still. I didn't move for a long time, just sat there, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine, trying to convince myself that what I'd experienced was nothing more than fatigue and imagination. But deep down, I knew better. I knew that something in that tunnel had watched me, had followed me, and that if I ever went back, it would be waiting. I didn't sleep that night. Found a truck stop about 15 miles down the road, one of those big commercial lots with a diner and fuel pumps, and enough light to make you feel like the world still made sense. I parked under a flood lamp, left the engine running, and sat in the cab with my hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that mile marker, 187. Twice. Same number, same faded paint, same position on the wall. It didn't make sense, and the part of me that relied on logic, on routine, on the predictable rhythm of the road, couldn't let it go. By the time the sun came up, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to run from this. I'd been driving these mountains for 16 years, and I wasn't about to let one strange night turn me into the kind of driver who avoids certain routes because of bad feelings. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I went back. The dispatcher called around 8, asking where I was with the delivery. I told him I'd had some engine trouble, needed to check a few things before I pushed on. He grumbled, but didn't press. I had a good record, and one delay wasn't going to raise any red flags. I told him I'd have the load delivered by noon, and he said fine, just keep him posted. I hung up, finished my coffee, and started the rig. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of bright winter day that makes everything look sharp and clean. The mountains were beautiful in the daylight, all green and gray, and dusted with patches of snow that hadn't melted yet. It was hard to believe that just a few hours ago, I'd been shaking in the dark, convinced something was following me through a tunnel. I took the same route back, watching for the signs, the landmarks, the turnoffs I'd passed the night before. The diner, where I'd stopped, was still there, looking even more run down in the daylight. The neon sign was off, and the parking lot was empty, except for a rusted pickup truck with no plates. I kept going, following the road as it climbed into the mountains, winding through the trees until I reached the tunnel approach. This time, the construction signs were gone. No cones, no lane closures, no digital warnings. Just the tunnel entrance, wide and dark, with a faded sign overhead that read, Blue Ridge Tunnel, built 1952. I pulled onto the shoulder before the entrance and killed the engine. Got out, stretched my legs, and walked up to the mouth of the tunnel. The air was colder here, like the mountain was exhaling. I could see about 30 feet inside before the darkness took over, and in that dim light I could make out the rough texture of the walls, the old concrete, the rusted fixtures that held the overhead lights. There were no workers, no equipment, no sign that any maintenance had been done recently. The road surface was smooth, unmarked, no fresh paint or patching. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I walked back to the rig, grabbed my flashlight and a notebook from the glove box, and decided to go in on foot. I know that sounds stupid. Most people would have just driven through, maybe taken a few pictures and called it a day. But I needed to see it up close. I needed to understand what had happened the night before, and the only way to do that was to walk it. So I did. The temperature dropped the moment I stepped inside. Not gradually, but all at once, like I'd crossed some invisible threshold. My breath misted in front of me, and the sound of my boots on the pavement echoed in a way that made the tunnel feel much larger than it actually was. I kept the flashlight beam low, sweeping it across the ground, looking for anything unusual. Tire tracks, debris, footprints. The pavement was clean, too clean. No gravel, no oil stains, no litter. Just smooth asphalt that looked like it had been scrubbed. I walked slowly, counting my steps, trying to measure the distance. The overhead lights were spaced about 50 feet apart, dim yellow bulbs encased in metal cages. Some of them flickered when I passed underneath, throwing jittery shadows on the walls. I reached the first service alcove after about 200 feet. It was on the right side, just like I remembered. A shallow recess with a rusted steel door at the back. The door had a small window at eye level, covered with wire mesh, and a handle that looked like it hadn't been turned in decades. I tried it anyway, locked, or maybe just rusted shut. Either way, it wasn't opening. I moved on, following the curve of the tunnel as it bent gently to the left. That's when I saw the emergency phone. Same yellow housing, same reflective sticker, same dangling receiver. But this time, in the daylight, I could see more. There was a logbook attached to the inside of the housing door, a small metal clipboard with a stack of yellowed pages held in place by a spring clip. I pulled it free, flipped through the pages. Most of them were blank, but a few had entries, handwritten notes in faded blue ink. They were dated, some from the 80s, a couple from the 90s, and one from just 6 months ago. The most recent entry read, 10:14, 2:30 a.m. Motorist reported hearing voices in service corridor. No personnel on duty. Advised to exit and contact state police. S. Hale, S. Hale. The name meant nothing to me, but the date did. 6 months ago. And the note, hearing voices. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. I took a photo of the page with my phone, replaced the logbook, and kept walking. The tunnel stretched on, longer than I remembered, longer than it should have been. I checked my phone. No signal. Not unusual for a tunnel, but still unsettling. I kept going, counting the overhead lights. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. At the 6th light, I saw it. Mile marker 187. Painted on the wall, faded white letters, exactly as I'd seen it the night before. I stopped, stared at it, checked the distance I'd walked. I'd come maybe half a mile, maybe a little more. That matched. But then I kept walking, counting my steps, measuring the distance, and after another quarter mile, I saw it again. 187. Same number, same position, same faded paint. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of it, trying to find some logical explanation. A mistake by the crew that painted them, a glitch in the design, a remnant from an old system that had been partially updated. But none of it fit. Mile markers don't repeat. They're sequential, deliberate, designed to give you a sense of progress, of distance covered. Seeing the same one twice meant something was wrong. Either with the tunnel or with me. I turned around, decided to head back, but as I did, I heard it. The sound of a door opening, metal scraping against concrete echoing through the tunnel. I spun around, flashed the light toward the sound. One of the service alcoves, maybe 100 feet ahead, the door was open. Just a crack, just enough to show a sliver of darkness beyond. I hadn't opened it. I'd tried the first one, and it had been locked. So either someone else was in here or something had opened on its own. I walked toward it slowly, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run. But I didn't. I kept going, step by step, until I was standing right in front of the alcove. The door was old, heavy steel, streaked with rust and grime. The gap was narrow, maybe 6 inches, and beyond it was darkness. Complete, absolute darkness. I aimed the flashlight through the gap, and the beam just stopped. Didn't penetrate, didn't reflect, just stopped like it had hit a wall of black. I reached out, pushed the door wider. It swung open with a long, grinding creak, and the smell hit me. Damp, earthy, with a faint metallic undertone, like standing in a basement that had flooded years ago and never been properly cleaned. The space beyond was small, maybe 10 feet square, with bare concrete walls and a low ceiling. There was a workbench along one wall, covered in dust and old tools. Wrenches, pliers, a coil of rope, and on the floor, near the back corner, was a jacket. Heavy canvas, stained and torn, with a name patch on the chest. I stepped inside, crouched down, and read the patch. Tolliver. My blood went cold. That was my name, my family name. But I'd never been in this tunnel before last night. Never left a jacket, never worked maintenance. I picked it up, checked the pockets, empty except for a folded piece of paper. I unfolded it carefully and my hand started to shake. It was a route log, handwritten, dated 1987, almost 40 years ago. And the name at the top, Ephraim Tolliver. I dropped the jacket, backed out of the alcove, and ran. Didn't care how it looked, didn't care if I was overreacting. I just ran, boots pounding on the pavement, flashlight beam bouncing wildly, lungs burning in the cold air. I ran until I saw the entrance, the daylight, the open sky. I burst out of the tunnel and collapsed on the shoulder, gasping, shaking, trying to process what I'd just seen. It took me a few minutes to pull myself together. I sat there on the gravel, knees pulled up to my chest, staring at the tunnel entrance. Part of me wanted to go back, to grab that jacket, to take it to someone who could explain it. But a bigger part of me knew that going back was a mistake. Whatever was in there, whatever connection it had to my name, to my family, I didn't want to know. Not yet. I stood up, brushed the dust off my jeans and walked back to the rig. That's when I saw the truck. It was parked on the opposite shoulder, a white pickup with a magnetic sign on the door that read, Blue Ridge Tunnel Authority, Maintenance. And leaning against the hood, arms crossed, watching me with a calm, unreadable expression, was a man in a dark blue uniform. He was maybe 50, maybe older, with gray hair cut short and a face that looked like it had seen a lot of long nights. He didn't move as I approached, just waited, like he'd known I'd be coming back. "You're Tolliver," he said. It wasn't a question. I stopped a few feet away, nodded slowly. "Yeah? And you are?" "Sutter Hale. I'm the night attendant for this stretch. Have been for about 12 years. He pushed off the hood, walked toward me, hands in his pockets. "Saw your rig parked here this morning. Figured you were the one from last night." "Last night?" "Got a call on the emergency line around 10:15. Someone picked up the receiver, didn't say anything, just left it hanging. By the time I got here, there was no one around. Just tire tracks and a half-empty coffee cup on the shoulder. I figured whoever it was got spooked and took off." I stared at him. "I didn't call anyone. I didn't even stop. I drove straight through." He nodded, like that didn't surprise him. "Yeah, that's usually how it goes. People don't remember stopping, or they remember it wrong. The tunnel does that sometimes." "Does what?" "Plays tricks. Messes with your sense of time, of distance. Some people see things that aren't there. Some people see things that are." He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, flipped through the pages. "You're not the first Tolliver to have trouble in that tunnel. Had one back in the 80s. Maintenance worker, disappeared during a night shift. They found his jacket in one of the service corridors, but never found him." My mouth went dry. "What was his name?" Hale looked up from the notebook, met my eyes. "Ephraim Tolliver." I didn't say anything, couldn't. The weight of it pressed down on me, heavy and cold. Hale closed the notebook, slipped it back into his pocket. "Look, I don't know what you saw in there, and I'm not going to ask. But if you're smart, you'll finish your delivery and find another route. This tunnel, it's got a memory. And sometimes that memory gets confused, starts pulling things from the past, mixing them with the present. People, places, events. It doesn't always make sense, but it's real enough to mess you up if you're not careful. Why hasn't anyone shut it down? Because it's functional. Mostly. The state doesn't care about a few weird stories. They care about traffic flow, about keeping the roads open. As long as the tunnel does its job, they're not going to ask questions." He walked back toward his truck, opened the door, then paused. "You want my advice? Don't go back in there. Whatever you think you need to find, it's not worth it." He climbed into the truck and drove off. leaving me standing there on the shoulder, staring at the tunnel entrance. I thought about what he'd said, about the memory of the tunnel, about things getting confused, about a man with my name who'd disappeared almost 40 years ago. And I thought about that jacket, about the root log with my name on it, dated decades before I was born. I got back in my rig, started the engine, and sat there for a long time. The smart thing would have been to listen to Hale, to take the long way around, to put this behind me and never look back. But I couldn't, because if there was a connection, if there was some reason my name kept showing up in that tunnel, I needed to know. Even if it scared me, even if it didn't make sense. So I made a decision. I'd finish the delivery like I promised, but after that I was coming back, and this time I wasn't leaving until I had answers. I made the delivery to Beckley by early afternoon. Backed the rig up to the loading dock, watched the crew unload the steel beams and hydraulic equipment, signed the paperwork, and collected my receipt. The whole time, my mind was somewhere else, back in that tunnel, back in that service alcove with the jacket and the root log. I kept seeing my name on that paper, written in handwriting that looked nothing like mine but somehow felt familiar. Like an echo of something I should have known but didn't. After the delivery, I drove to a gas station on the edge of town, filled up the tank, and sat in the cab trying to decide what to do next. The smart play was obvious. Take Hale's advice, head back to Charleston. Forget the whole thing. There were plenty of routes through these mountains. I didn't need to use that tunnel ever again, but the questions wouldn't leave me alone. Who was the other Ephraim Tolliver? Why did he disappear? And why did it feel like the tunnel was waiting for me specifically, like it had been waiting for decades? I pulled out my phone and did what anyone would do in 2024. I searched. Started with the basics. Ephraim Tolliver disappearance, West Virginia, 1987. A few hits came back, mostly from local newspaper archives that had been digitized years ago. The Fayetteville Register had run a small piece in March of 1987. Maintenance worker vanishes during overnight shift. No signs of foul play. Personal effects found in service corridor. Investigation ongoing. That was it. No follow-up articles, no closure, nothing. I dug deeper, searching genealogy sites, public records, anything that might give me a connection. And that's when I found it. A family tree entry for Ephraim Samuel Tolliver, born 1951, worked for the State Highway Department. Married to a woman named Tamsin Crowell in 1979. No children listed. No death certificate. Just a notation. Missing, presumed deceased, 1987. Tamsin Crowell. The name stood out because it was unusual, old-fashioned, the kind of name you don't hear much anymore. I ran a search for her, narrowed it down to West Virginia, and found an address in a small town called Maple Ridge, about 20 miles from the tunnel. No phone number listed, but the address was there. I stared at it for a long time, weighing my options. This was crossing a line. Going from curiosity to actively digging into someone's past, someone's pain. But I needed to know. So I put the address into my GPS and started driving. Maple Ridge was the kind of town that time forgot. One main street with a post office, a general store, and a church with a steeple that leaned slightly to the left. The houses were old, well-kept but tired-looking, with front porches that sagged and paint that needed refreshing. I found the address at the end of a gravel lane, a small white house surrounded by bare trees, and a yard full of dead leaves. There was a mailbox at the road with the name Crowell painted on the side in faded black letters. I parked the rig on the street, didn't want to pull into the driveway and seem aggressive, and walked up to the front door. My heart was pounding harder than it should have been. This wasn't dangerous. This was just a conversation. But something about it felt heavy, like I was about to open a door that had been closed for a very long time. I knocked 3 times, waited, heard movement inside. Footsteps, slow and careful. The door opened, and a woman stood there, looking at me with eyes that were sharp and cautious. She was in her 70s, maybe older, with white hair pulled back in a bun, and a face that had seen a lot of years, but hadn't lost its strength. She wore a cardigan over a plain dress, and her hands, resting on the edge of the door, were thin and veined but steady. She didn't say anything, just looked at me, waiting. "Mrs. Crowell?" I said, keeping my voice low and respectful. "My name's Ephraim Tolliver. I'm a truck driver, and I think I might have some information about your husband." Her expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Or resignation. She stepped back, held the door open. "Come in." The inside of the house was neat and sparse. Old furniture, clean but worn, photographs on the walls, most of them black and white or faded color prints from decades ago. She led me to a small sitting room with 2 chairs and a coffee table stacked with old books and newspapers. She gestured for me to sit, and I did, suddenly feeling like I was intruding on something sacred. "You're not the first," she said, sitting across from me. Her voice was quiet, steady, like she'd had this conversation before. "Every few years, someone comes around asking about Ephraim. Reporters, investigators, curious folks, they all want to know what happened in that tunnel. I'm not a reporter," I said. "I'm just trying to understand something that happened to me. I drove through that tunnel 2 nights ago, and I saw things. Things that don't make sense. And then I found a jacket in one of the service alcoves with my name on it. His name. I don't know how it's possible, but it's possible," she said, cutting me off. She leaned back in her chair, folded her hands in her lap. "That tunnel has a way of pulling things out of time. People, objects, moments. My husband wasn't the first to go missing there, and he wasn't the last. But he's the only one I knew personally, so he's the one I remember." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees. "What happened to him?" She was quiet for a moment, staring at the photographs on the wall. Then she spoke, and her voice carried the weight of 40 years of unanswered questions. "Ephraim worked maintenance for the state. Night shifts, mostly. He liked the quiet, said it gave him time to think. In March of 1987, he was assigned to inspect the service corridors in the Blue Ridge Tunnel. Routine work. He'd done it 100 times before. He called me around midnight, said he'd found something strange. A door that shouldn't have been there. A corridor that wasn't on any of the maps. He said he was going to check it out, take a few pictures, file a report. That was the last time I heard his voice." She paused, swallowed hard. "They found his jacket the next morning, tools, flashlight, everything scattered like he'd dropped them in a hurry. But no sign of him. No blood, no struggle, nothing. Just gone." "Did they ever figure out what happened?" "Officially, no. They said he probably had an accident, fell into a ventilation shaft or got disoriented and wandered off. But I knew Ephraim. He didn't get disoriented, he didn't panic, and he wouldn't have left his tools behind." She met my eyes, and I saw the pain there, still raw after all these years. "I think he found something he wasn't supposed to find, and whatever it was, it didn't want him to leave." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Mrs. Crowell, I need to know, is there any connection between him and me? Same name, same—" "I don't know," she said. "I've thought about it for years. Wondered if maybe there was some family connection, some distant branch of the tree. But I never found anything. It's just a coincidence. Or maybe it's not. Maybe that tunnel doesn't care about logic. Maybe it just takes what it wants. I sat back, trying to process it all. The attendant I spoke to, Sutter Hale, he said the tunnel has a memory, that it mixes the past and present. Do you think that's what's happening? That I'm somehow connected to what happened to your husband? I think, she said slowly, carefully, that if you keep going back there, you're going to find out. And I'm not sure that's something you want. But it was too late. I was already in too deep. I thanked her, stood up to leave, and she walked me to the door. Before I stepped outside, she reached out and touched my arm. If you do go back, she said, be careful. And if you find him, if you find any trace of what happened, let me know. I've been waiting a long time for answers. I promised her I would, and I meant it. I drove straight back to the tunnel. It was late afternoon by then, the sun already starting to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the road. I parked on the shoulder near the entrance and called Sutter Hale. He answered on the third ring, his voice gruff and tired. "Tolliver, figured you'd call." "I need to go back in there," I said. "Tonight, and I need your help." There was a long pause, then, "You talked to Tamsin." "Yeah." Another pause. "All right, meet me at the north entrance at 8. Bring a flashlight and something to defend yourself with. Not because you'll need it, but because it'll make you feel better." He hung up before I could ask what he meant. At 8 o'clock, I met Hale at the north entrance. He was standing next to his truck, holding a heavy-duty flashlight and wearing a utility belt loaded with tools. He looked at me, nodded once, and gestured toward the tunnel. "Let's get this over with." We walked in together, side by side, our footsteps echoing in the cold air. Hale didn't say much, just pointed out the features as we passed them. Emergency phones, service alcoves, ventilation shafts. He knew the tunnel like the back of his hand, every inch of it mapped in his mind. But even he seemed uneasy, his shoulders tight, his eyes constantly scanning the walls. We reached the first mile marker, 187. I pointed it out to him. "There, that's the one I keep seeing." He aimed his flashlight at it, studied it for a moment. "That marker's been here since the 50s. Nothing unusual about it. Then why do I keep seeing it twice?" He looked at me, and in the dim light I could see the doubt in his eyes. "Because you're not seeing the same marker twice. You're seeing two different versions of the same tunnel, one from now and one from somewhere else, sometime else. That doesn't make sense." "No," he agreed. "It doesn't, but that doesn't mean it's not happening." We kept walking, deeper into the tunnel, past the point where I'd turned back before. The air grew colder, damper, and the sound of our footsteps changed, became heavier, like the tunnel itself was listening. Hale stopped suddenly, held up a hand. "There." I followed his gaze. One of the service alcoves about 50 feet ahead. The door was open, not just cracked, but fully open, revealing the darkness beyond. Hale approached it carefully, flashlight raised, and I followed. Inside, the space was larger than the first one I'd seen. Not a storage room, but a corridor. Narrow, low-ceilinged, stretching back into the mountain. "This isn't on any map," Hale said quietly. "Shouldn't be here." We stepped inside. The corridor was lined with old pipes and electrical conduits rusted and dripping with condensation. The floor was uneven, sloping slightly downward, and the walls were covered in graffiti. Not the usual tags and scrawls you'd expect, but dates, hundreds of them, scratched into the concrete with something sharp. 1952, 1967, 1981, 19 I stopped at the last one, ran my fingers over the numbers. This is when he disappeared. Hale nodded, aimed his light further down the corridor. Come on, we're not done yet. We followed the corridor for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. It twisted and turned, branching off in places, but Hale seemed to know where he was going. Finally, we reached a dead end. A solid wall of concrete, unmarked, featureless. Except for one thing. A handprint pressed into the surface like the concrete had been soft when it was made. And next to it, scratched into the wall, 2 words. Help me. I stared at it, my chest tight, my breath shallow. Hale stepped closer, examined the handprint. This is fresh, can't be more than a few days old. How is that possible? If Ephraim Tolliver disappeared in 1987, then either he's still alive down here, Hale said, his voice flat, or something's using his memory to call for help. Before I could respond, we heard it. A sound from somewhere behind us, back the way we'd come. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. Hale and I looked at each other, and without a word, we ran. We ran through that corridor like our lives depended on it, and maybe they did. The footsteps behind us were steady, unhurried, like whatever was following knew it had all the time in the world. Hale was ahead of me, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the walls, illuminating the rusted pipes and dripping condensation in quick, jarring flashes. My lungs burned from the cold air, and my boots slipped on the uneven floor. But I didn't slow down. Couldn't slow down. The sound of those footsteps, the deliberate rhythm of them, was more terrifying than any sprint or chase could have been. We burst back into the main tunnel, and Hale immediately veered left, heading toward the south entrance. I followed, glancing back just once. The service alcove we'd emerged from was dark, empty, the door hanging open like a mouth. Nothing came out. Nothing followed. But I could feel it. That presence, that weight pressing down on the air around us. It was still there, just out of sight, waiting. We didn't stop running until we were outside, past the tunnel entrance, past the cones and the faded signs, out into the open air where the night sky stretched above us and the wind carried the smell of pine and earth. Hale doubled over, hands on his knees, breathing hard. I leaned against the side of my rig, chest heaving, trying to process what had just happened. For a long time, neither of us spoke. We just stood there in the dark, listening to the sound of our own breathing and the distant hum of the highway. Finally, Hale straightened up, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and looked at me. His face was pale, his expression grim. "That corridor," he said, his voice rough. "I've worked this tunnel for 12 years, and I've never seen anything like that. It's not in any of the original blueprints, not in the maintenance logs. It's like it just appeared." "Or like it's always been there," I said, "and no one's been looking in the right place." He nodded slowly. "Either way, we need to report this. Get someone out here to inspect it properly. State engineers, maybe the police. Something's not right, and it's beyond what you and I can handle." I agreed, but part of me doubted it would make any difference. Whatever was in that tunnel, it had been there for decades. It had taken Ephraim Tolliver in 1987, and it had tried to take me. Reporting it to the authorities might get the tunnel shut down, might get some officials asking questions, but would it actually stop anything? I wasn't sure. Hale pulled out his phone, made a call to his supervisor, explained the situation in vague terms. Unauthorized corridor, potential safety hazard, needs immediate inspection. He didn't mention the footsteps, didn't mention the handprint or the message scratched into the wall, just kept it technical, professional. When he hung up, he looked at me and said, "They're sending a crew out tomorrow morning. They want me to write up a full report, document everything we saw. You should do the same, get it on record." I nodded, but I was already thinking about what I'd write. How do you document something that shouldn't exist? How do you explain a corridor that isn't on any map, a handprint that's 40 years old but somehow fresh, a set of footsteps that follow you but never catch up? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that any report I wrote would sound like the ramblings of someone who'd been awake too long, who'd seen too much, who'd let their imagination run wild. But I wrote it anyway, got back in my rig, pulled out a notebook, and spent the next hour documenting everything. The route I'd taken, the time I'd entered the tunnel, the mile markers I'd seen, the service alcove, the corridor, the dates scratched into the walls. I described the handprint, the message, the sound of the footsteps. I wrote it all down in as much detail as I could remember, and when I was done, I read it back to myself. It sounded insane, but it was the truth, or at least as close to the truth as I could get. I stayed in the truck that night, parked on the shoulder with the engine running and the doors locked. Didn't sleep, just sat there, watching the tunnel entrance in the side mirror, waiting for something to emerge. Nothing did. The night passed slowly, the hours dragging by, and when the first light of dawn started to creep over the mountains, I felt a small measure of relief. Daylight didn't make the tunnel any less dangerous, but it made it feel less malevolent, like whatever was in there only had power in the dark. Around 7 in the morning, Hale showed up again, this time with 2 state engineers in a white SUV. They parked near the entrance, and I watched as they geared up with flashlights, hard hats, and clipboards. Hale talked to them for a few minutes, gesturing toward the tunnel, and then they went inside. I got out of my rig, walked over to Hale, and asked if I should go with them. "No," he said flatly. "They don't need civilians complicating things. Just stay here, and if they find anything, I'll let you know." So I waited, leaned against the hood of my truck, drank lukewarm coffee from a thermos, and watched the tunnel entrance like it might swallow the engineers whole. An hour passed, then another. Finally, around 9:30, they emerged, and I could tell from their body language that something was wrong. They weren't walking like people who'd just completed a routine inspection. They were walking like people who'd seen something they couldn't explain. Hale talked to them for a few minutes, and I caught fragments of the conversation. No corridor, solid wall. Must have been a different alcove. When they finished, the engineers got back in their SUV and drove off without even acknowledging me. Hale walked over, his face unreadable. "They didn't find it," he said. I stared at him. "What do you mean they didn't find it? We were just there, we saw it." "I know. But when they checked the alcove, it was just a storage room. 10 by 10. Concrete walls, workbench, tools, no corridor, no dates on the walls, nothing." "That's impossible." "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." We stood there in silence, and I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. The tunnel had changed, or maybe it had always been changing, shifting, showing different things to different people at different times. Either way, it meant that whatever we'd seen, whatever we'd experienced, was ours alone. No one else would believe it, no one else would find it. The tunnel had shown us something, and then it had taken it back. "What about the handprint?" I asked. "The message?" "They didn't see anything like that, just empty walls." I rubbed my face, trying to make sense of it. "So, what do we do?" Hale shrugged. "We file our reports, we tell the truth, and then we move on. Because there's nothing else we can do. The tunnel's not going to give up its secrets just because we want answers." He was right, of course, but it didn't make it any easier. Over the next few days, I tried to return to some sense of normalcy. I took a few local jobs, short hauls that didn't require overnight driving, routes that kept me away from the mountains. I avoided the Blue Ridge Tunnel, took the long way around whenever I had a delivery in that area. But the questions never left me. I kept thinking about that corridor, about the dates on the walls, about the handprint and the message. I kept thinking about Ephraim Tolliver, the man who'd disappeared 40 years ago, and whether he was still down there somewhere, trapped in some fold of time that the tunnel had created. I also kept thinking about Tamsin Crowell. I'd promised her I'd let her know if I found anything, and I had. But what was I supposed to tell her? That I'd found a message, a handprint, a trace of her husband, but that it had vanished before anyone else could see it? That the tunnel had shown me something and then hidden it away? It felt cruel, giving her hope only to snatch it back. But I'd made a promise, so I drove back to Maple Ridge. She answered the door the same way she had before, with that cautious, steady expression, like she'd been expecting me. I told her everything. The corridor, the dates, the handprint, the message. I told her about the footsteps, about running, about how the engineers had found nothing when they went back. She listened without interrupting, her hands folded in her lap, her face unreadable. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Thank you." I blinked. For what? I didn't find him. I didn't bring you any real answers. You went looking, she said simply. That's more than anyone else has done in 40 years. You didn't have to. You could have walked away, forgotten about it, moved on. But you didn't. You tried, and that means something. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. She stood up, walked over to a small desk in the corner, and pulled out an old photograph. She handed it to me. It showed a man in his 30s, wearing a maintenance uniform, standing in front of the tunnel entrance with a slight smile on his face. He had dark hair, a strong jaw, and eyes that looked tired but kind. "That's Ephraim," she said. "Taken a few months before he disappeared. I want you to have it. Not because I think you'll find him, but because I think you understand. You've seen what that tunnel can do. You've felt it. And maybe in some way that connects you to him." I took the photograph carefully, like it might crumble in my hands. "I'll keep looking," I said, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. "If I ever find anything else, I'll let you know." She smiled faintly. "I know you will." I left Maple Ridge that afternoon and drove back to Charleston. Filed my official report with the dispatcher, kept it vague and factual, didn't mention the corridor or the footsteps. Just noted that I'd experienced some unusual conditions in the tunnel and recommended a full structural inspection. The dispatcher logged it, said he'd pass it along to the state, and that was the end of it. No follow-up, no questions, no investigation. Just another report in a long line of reports that would probably never be read. But I couldn't let it go. Over the next few weeks, I did my own research, dug through old newspapers, talked to retired highway workers, reached out to anyone who might have information about the tunnel's history. I learned that it had been built in 1952, carved through solid rock using techniques that were considered cutting edge at the time. I learned that there had been accidents during construction, 3 workers killed in a collapse. Their bodies never recovered. I learned that there had been other disappearances over the years, not just Ephraim Tolliver, but at least 5 other people who had gone into that tunnel and never come out. None of it explained what I'd seen. None of it gave me answers, but it did give me a pattern. The tunnel had a history. A long, dark history of taking people. And whatever was in there, whatever presence or force or anomaly existed in that mountain, it had been active for decades, maybe longer. I also started noticing things, small things, things that didn't quite add up. Like the fact that my route logs from that night showed a gap, a 20-minute window where my GPS signal had dropped completely. Or the fact that when I checked the maintenance records for the tunnel, there was no mention of any work being done on the night I'd driven through. No lane closures, no crews, no reason for the cones and the signs. It was like the tunnel had manufactured the entire scenario just to get me inside. And then there was the photograph. The one Tamsin had given me. I kept it in my glove box, and every now and then I'd take it out and look at it. And one night, about a month after everything had happened, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the background of the photo, just barely visible behind Ephraim Tolliver's shoulder, was the tunnel entrance. And standing in the entrance, partially obscured by shadow, was a figure. Tall, motionless, watching. I took the photo to a shop that specialized in digital enhancement, had them blow up the background and sharpen the image. When I got it back, the figure was clearer. It was a man, wearing what looked like work clothes, standing just inside the tunnel. And his face, though blurred, looked familiar. It looked like me. I stopped sleeping well after that. Started having dreams where I was walking through the tunnel, over and over, passing the same mile marker, hearing the same footsteps, opening the same service alcove door. And in every dream, I'd find something different. Sometimes it was the corridor with the dates. Sometimes it was a room full of old equipment. Sometimes it was nothing, just empty space. But in every dream, I could feel that presence, that weight, pressing down on me, waiting. I talked to Hale one more time, about 3 months after the incident. Called him up, asked if he'd noticed anything unusual in the tunnel since that night. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Yeah, I have. The mile markers are off. Not by much, just a few feet here and there. And sometimes when I'm doing my rounds, I hear things. Voices, footsteps, echoes that don't match up." I filed a report with the state. Suggested they do a full survey, check the structural integrity. They said they'd get around to it eventually. "Do you think they will?" "No," he said. "I don't. And honestly, I'm not sure it would make a difference. That tunnel, it's got a life of its own, always has. We're just passing through." He hung up after that, and I never called him again. Didn't see the point. He'd seen what I'd seen, experienced what I'd experienced, and like me, he was stuck with questions that had no answers. I still drive trucks, still take jobs through the Appalachians, but I don't go through the Blue Ridge Tunnel anymore. I take the long way, add an extra hour to my route, pay the extra fuel costs. It's worth it, because every time I see that tunnel entrance in the distance, every time I pass a sign that points toward it, I feel that tightness in my chest, that sense of something waiting. And I know that if I go back, if I ever set foot in that tunnel again, I might not come out. Sometimes, late at night when I'm parked at a rest stop, I take out that photograph and look at it. At Ephraim Tolliver standing in front of the tunnel, smiling like he doesn't know what's about to happen. And at the figure in the background, the one that looks like me, standing in the shadows, watching. And I wonder if that's my future. If somewhere, in some fold of time, I'm already in that tunnel. Already gone. Already part of whatever dark memory that place holds. I also think about the other Ephraim Tolliver, the one who disappeared in 1987. I think about his wife, waiting for 40 years for answers that never came. And I think about that handprint on the wall, that message scratched into the concrete. Help me. Fresh. Like it had just been made. Like he was still there, still trying to get out. But the thing that keeps me up at night, the thing that I can't shake, is this. When we ran from that corridor, when we heard those footsteps following us, I looked back, just for a second, and in the beam of Hale's flashlight, I saw a shadow on the wall. Not our shadows. Someone else's. And it was reaching out, like it was trying to grab us, trying to pull us back. And for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, I saw a face. It was my face. I haven't told anyone about that. Not Hale, not Tamsin, not anyone. because I don't know what it means. I don't know if what I saw was real, or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me, or if it was something worse. Something that suggests that time in that tunnel doesn't work the way it should, that past and future are tangled together, that the man who disappeared in 1987 and the man driving through in 2024 are somehow the same person, caught in a loop that has no beginning and no end. I've thought about going back, thought about it more times than I can count. Thought about walking into that tunnel one more time, finding that corridor, following it all the way to the end and seeing what's really there. But I haven't, because I'm afraid of what I'll find. Afraid that if I go back, I won't be able to leave. Afraid that the tunnel will finally get what it's been waiting for all these years. So I drive. I take the long routes. I avoid the mountains when I can, and I keep that photograph in my glove box, a reminder of what happened, of what I saw, of what might still be waiting. And every now and then, when I'm on a quiet stretch of highway late at night, I'll see a mile marker in my headlights. And for just a second, I'll think it's the wrong number. That I've seen it before. That I'm back in that tunnel, driving in circles, passing the same point over and over. But then I'll blink, and the number will be right, and I'll keep driving. Because that's all I can do. Keep moving. Keep going forward, and hope that whatever's in that tunnel, whatever presence or force or memory, stays where it is. Stays in the past. Stays in the dark. But deep down, I know it won't. Because that tunnel doesn't forget. It doesn't let go. And sooner or later, it's going to call me back. And when it does, I don't know if I'll be strong enough to say no. The photograph sits in my glove box. Ephraim Tolliver, 1987, smiling in front of a tunnel that would take him. And in the background, barely visible, a figure in the shadows. Watching. Waiting. I check it sometimes, late at night. And every time I do, the figure looks a little closer. A little clearer. A little more like me. My name is Arden Foxley. I'm 34 years old, and I've been driving commercial trucks for the past 11 years. Started right out of trade school, got my CDL, and never looked back. Most people assume trucking is a man's world, and maybe it was once, but I've never let that stop me. I've hauled everything from produce to pharmaceuticals, driven through every kind of weather you can imagine, and logged more miles than most people will drive in their entire lives. I'm good at what I do. I know my rig, I know the roads, and I know when something doesn't feel right. This story is about one of those times when everything felt wrong from the start, and I ignored it anyway. It was early March, late winter in the Rockies, and I'd picked up a load in Denver, headed for a distribution center in Grand Junction. Medical supplies, mostly. Sterile equipment, bandages, pharmaceutical-grade containers. Nothing unusual, just standard freight with a tight delivery window. The route was straightforward. Take I-70 west through the mountains, cut through the Eisenhower Tunnel, and follow the interstate all the way to the drop point. I'd done it dozens of times. The Eisenhower is one of the longest mountain tunnels in North America. Sits at over 11,000 feet elevation, and in winter it can be a nightmare. But I'd driven it in worse conditions, and the weather forecast looked manageable. Light snow, nothing serious. I left Denver around 4 in the afternoon, figuring I'd make the delivery by midnight if I kept a steady pace. Traffic was light heading out of the city, mostly locals commuting home and a few other commercial rigs headed west. The sky was gray and heavy, the kind of low clouds that promise snow but haven't decided when to start. I had my CB on, listening to the usual chatter between drivers. Road conditions, truck stop recommendations, complaints about dispatchers, normal stuff. nothing that raised any red flags. As I climbed into the mountains, the temperature started dropping fast. I watched the gauge on my dashboard slide from 42 degrees down to 38, then 34, then 29. By the time I reached the approach to the Eisenhower, it was hovering around 23 and the first flakes of snow were starting to hit the windshield. Not heavy yet, just scattered, drifting down from the clouds in lazy spirals. I turned on the wipers, adjusted my speed, and kept climbing. The traffic thinned out as I got higher. Most of the passenger vehicles had exited at earlier towns, and the few remaining cars were driving cautiously, their headlights cutting pale beams through the growing dusk. I passed a road sign that read, Eisenhower Tunnel, 5 miles. Below it, a digital display flashed. Chains required for commercial vehicles. I'd already checked my chains before leaving Denver, made sure they were secure in the storage compartment. Didn't need them yet, but I knew I might before the night was over. The snow started coming down harder. Not a blizzard, not yet, but enough to coat the road in a thin layer of white that made the lane markers harder to see. I slowed to 45, kept my eyes on the road, and listened to the CB. A driver, a few miles ahead of me, was reporting reduced visibility near the tunnel entrance. Another was saying the eastbound lane had been closed temporarily due to an accident. Standard stuff for this stretch in winter. I made a mental note and kept going. Then the CB crackled with something different. A voice I didn't recognize, low and tense, cutting through the usual chatter. Any commercial drivers approaching Eisenhower be advised. Westbound lane at the summit is down to single file. State Patrol has cones set up. Looks like they're doing some kind of inspection. Backup's building fast. I frowned, picked up the mic. This is Foxley, westbound at mile marker 213. What kind of inspection are we talking about? A pause, then the same voice came back. Don't know. They're not saying. Just waving trucks into the right lane, making everyone slow down. Might be checking for overweight loads. Might be random safety checks. Either way, you're looking at a 20-30-minute delay minimum. I checked my watch. If I hit a 30-minute delay, I'd still make the delivery on time, but it would be tight. I keyed the mic again. Copy that. Appreciate the heads up. I clicked off and focused on the road. The snow was falling steadily now, thick flakes that swirled in the headlights and stuck to the windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. Visibility was dropping, maybe 100 yards ahead, maybe less. I could see the taillights of the vehicles in front of me, dim red glows in the white haze, and I used them as a guide, keeping a safe distance, matching their speed. The approach to the Eisenhower Tunnel is a long, winding climb through a valley carved between mountain peaks. On a clear day, it's beautiful. All granite cliffs and pine forests dusted with snow. But in a storm, it's claustrophobic. The mountains press in on both sides. The road narrows, and the wind funnels through the valley like it's trying to push you off course. I gripped the wheel tighter, felt the rig sway slightly as a gust hit the trailer, and kept climbing. Finally, I saw the tunnel entrance ahead. A massive concrete arch cut into the mountainside, lit by overhead floodlights that cast a sickly yellow glow over the snow-covered approach. And just like the driver on the CB had said, there were cones. Orange traffic cones arranged in a line, funneling the westbound lane from 2 lanes down to 1. I could see a few vehicles ahead of me, a sedan, a pickup truck, and another semi, all slowing down as they merged. And standing near the cones, partially obscured by the falling snow, were figures in reflective vests. State Patrol, maybe. Or highway maintenance. Hard to tell from a distance. I downshifted, brought the rig down to a crawl, and followed the line. The vehicles ahead of me passed through the checkpoint slowly, one at a time, and I watched as one of the figures in a vest waved them forward with a flashlight. No one was being pulled over, No one was being stopped for more than a few seconds. It looked routine, but something about it felt off. Maybe it was the way the figures stood, too still, too rigid. Or maybe it was the fact that I couldn't see their faces clearly through the snow and the glare of the floodlights. Either way, my gut told me to pay attention. When it was my turn, I eased the rig forward and stopped when the figure raised a hand. Up close, I could see he was wearing a heavy coat, a reflective vest over the top, and a hood pulled up against the snow. His face was shadowed, hard to make out, but I could see the glint of a flashlight in his hand. He approached the driver's side window and I rolled it down halfway, letting in a blast of cold air. "Evening," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "What's the holdup?" He didn't answer right away, just aimed the flashlight at my face, held it there for a second too long, then swept the beam across the interior of the cab. I felt a prickle of irritation, but kept my expression calm. After what felt like an eternity, he lowered the light and said, "Routine safety check. We're looking for hazardous materials, overweight loads, documentation issues. You got your manifest?" I nodded, reached for the clipboard on the passenger seat and handed it through the window. He took it, glanced at it briefly, didn't really read it, and handed it back. "You're good. Keep it under 40 through the tunnel. Road conditions are deteriorating fast." "Copy that," I said, and started to roll up the window. But before I could, he leaned in slightly and said, "If you see anything unusual inside, don't stop. Just keep driving." I paused, my hand on the window crank. "Unusual like what?" He didn't answer, just stepped back, waved me forward with the flashlight and turned to the next vehicle. I hesitated for a second, then rolled up the window and put the rig in gear. The whole exchange had taken maybe 2 minutes, but it left me with an uneasy feeling in my chest. Don't stop. What the hell was that supposed to mean? I drove through the checkpoint and into the tunnel. The temperature inside was warmer, maybe by 10 degrees, and the sound of the engine changed, became deeper, more resonant as it echoed off the walls. The tunnel is about 2 miles long, a straight shot through solid granite, with overhead lights spaced at regular intervals and emergency phones mounted on the walls every few hundred feet. I'd been through it countless times, and it had never bothered me. But tonight, something felt different. The traffic ahead of me was moving slowly, maybe 30 miles an hour, and I kept pace, staying in the right lane as instructed. The tunnel walls were smooth concrete, painted white in some sections, bare rock in others. The lights overhead were dim, casting long shadows that flickered as I passed underneath. I checked my mirrors, saw the headlights of another truck behind me, maybe 50 yards back, and felt a small measure of relief. At least I wasn't alone in here. Then I saw the first service niche. It was on the right side, a shallow alcove cut into the wall, maybe 6 feet deep, with a rusted steel door at the back. Nothing unusual about it. Tunnels have service niches for maintenance crews, for emergency equipment, for ventilation shafts. But as I passed this one, I caught a glimpse of something that made me do a double take. There was a light inside. Not a steady light, but a flickering, strobing light, like someone was shining a flashlight on and off at irregular intervals. I slowed slightly, trying to get a better look, but the angle was wrong and I was already past it. I glanced in the side mirror, saw the niche receding behind me, the light still flickering. Probably just a maintenance crew, I told myself. Someone working on electrical systems or checking ventilation. Nothing to worry about. But that uneasiness in my chest grew heavier. A few hundred yards later, I saw another service niche. Same setup, same rusted door, and again, there was a light inside. This time it was brighter, more erratic, strobing fast, like a strobe light at a concert. I felt my pulse quicken. 2 niches, 2 lights, both flickering in the same strange pattern. That wasn't normal. That wasn't maintenance. I picked up the CB mic, keyed it, and spoke into the channel. "This is Foxley, westbound in Eisenhower. Anyone else seeing the lights in the service niches?" "Over." Static, no response. I tried again. "Foxley, to any westbound traffic. Are you seeing the strobing lights?" "Over." More static. Then, faintly, a voice. Not the same driver from before. This one was different. Higher pitched, strained. "Stay in your lane. Don't look. Just drive." The transmission cut off before I could respond. I stared at the CB, my hand still on the mic, my heart pounding now. "Don't look. Just drive." The same message. Worded differently, but carrying the same weight. Something was happening in this tunnel, and whatever it was, people knew about it. People were trying to warn me. I forced myself to focus on the road. The taillights of the vehicle ahead were still visible, steady and reassuring. I kept my speed consistent, my hands on the wheel, my eyes forward. But I couldn't stop myself from glancing at the next service niche as I approached it. And when I did, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was someone standing inside. A figure, tall and motionless, backlit by the flickering light. I couldn't make out any details, couldn't see a face or clothing or anything that would identify them. Just a silhouette, perfectly still, facing the tunnel. Facing me. As I passed, the figure didn't move, didn't react, just stood there like a statue. And in the mirror, I saw it turn its head slowly, tracking my rig as I drove away. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My breath was coming faster now, shallow and tight, and I could feel the panic creeping up my spine. What the hell was going on? Who were these people? And why were they standing in the service niches watching traffic pass by? The radio crackled again, and this time the voice was louder, clearer, more urgent. "If you're in the tunnel right now, listen carefully. There's an operation happening. It's not official. It's not safe. Keep your windows up, your doors locked, and do not stop for any reason. Do you copy?" I grabbed the mic, my hands shaking. Copy? What kind of operation? But the voice didn't respond. Just static, hissing and popping in the silence of the cab. I tried again, keyed the mic multiple times, but got nothing. The radio was dead or blocked. Either way, I was on my own. I kept driving, passing more service niches, and in each one, I saw the same thing. Figures standing in the flickering light, motionless, watching. Some were alone, some in pairs, but they all had the same posture. Rigid, unmoving, like they were waiting for something. And the lights, those strobing erratic lights, never stopped. They pulsed and flickered in a rhythm that felt deliberate, like a signal, like a code. The tunnel seemed longer than I remembered. I checked the odometer, tried to calculate how far I'd gone, but I couldn't focus. My mind was racing, trying to piece together what I was seeing, what it meant. Was this some kind of smuggling operation? A checkpoint that wasn't sanctioned? Were those figures law enforcement or something else? And why were they just standing there watching, not doing anything? Finally, after what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, I saw the end of the tunnel, a pale circle of gray light, barely visible through the falling snow. But there, the exit. I pushed the accelerator slightly, felt the rig surge forward and aimed for that light like it was the only thing in the world that mattered. As I burst out of the tunnel and into the open air, the snow hit me like a wall. Full whiteout conditions, the kind where you can barely see 10 feet ahead. But I didn't care. I was out of the tunnel, out of that claustrophobic darkness, and I could breathe again. I pulled onto the shoulder as soon as it was safe, killed the engine, and sat there, shaking, staring at the tunnel entrance in the side mirror. The figures were gone. The lights were off. The tunnel looked normal, just a dark opening in the mountain, with traffic flowing through it like nothing had happened. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew something was wrong. And I knew I couldn't just drive away and pretend it hadn't happened. I reached for my phone, started to dial 911, then stopped. What would I even say? That I saw people standing in service niches? That there were strobing lights? It sounded insane. It sounded like the ramblings of someone who'd been driving too long, who'd let their imagination run wild. But it was real. I knew it was real. So I sat there in the snow, engine off, hands still trembling, and tried to figure out what to do next. I sat there on the shoulder for maybe 10 minutes, watching the snow pile up on the windshield, watching the tunnel entrance in my mirror, trying to decide what to do. The smart thing would have been to keep driving, make my delivery, file a vague report with my dispatcher, and let someone else deal with it. But I couldn't shake what I'd seen. Those figures standing in the service niches, perfectly still, backlit by strobing lights. The warnings on the CB radio. The checkpoint that didn't feel official. Something was happening in that tunnel, something organized, and I needed to understand what it was. I started the engine, turned on the heater, and grabbed my phone. No signal. Not unusual at this elevation, especially in a storm, but frustrating. I couldn't call 911, couldn't reach my dispatcher, couldn't do anything except sit here and think. I pulled out my logbook, flipped to a blank page, and started writing down everything I could remember. The time I'd entered the tunnel, approximately 6:47 p.m. The checkpoint at the entrance. The man in the reflective vest who'd told me not to stop. The service niches, at least 6 of them that I'd counted, each with flickering lights and figures inside. The CB warnings, the blocked radio signal, the way the tunnel had felt longer than it should have been. When I finished writing, I read it back to myself. It sounded paranoid, conspiratorial, like something you'd read on a trucker forum at 3 a.m, but it was what I'd experienced, and I trusted my own eyes more than I trusted my ability to explain it. I closed the logbook, set it on the passenger seat, and made a decision. I wasn't going to just drive away. I was going to find out what was happening, even if it meant putting myself at risk. I checked my mirrors, saw a gap in the traffic, and pulled back onto the highway. The snow was coming down harder now, full whiteout conditions, and my visibility was maybe 20 feet. I turned on my hazard lights, slowed to a crawl, and followed the vague outline of the road as it curved down the western slope of the pass. The plan was simple. Find a place to turn around, go back through the tunnel, and document everything I could. Take photos, record video, gather evidence. Then take it to the state police and let them sort it out. But before I could execute that plan, I saw something that changed everything. About a mile down from the tunnel exit, on the right side of the highway, there was a pullout. A small gravel lot, barely visible through the snow, with a single vehicle parked in it. A wrecker truck, white with faded blue lettering on the side, the kind of truck that tows disabled vehicles, pulls cars out of ditches, responds to accidents. It was idling, exhaust rising from the tailpipe, and I could see a figure sitting in the cab, barely visible through the frosted windows. I slowed even further, debating whether to stop. On one hand, a wrecker driver might have information, might have seen something, might be able to help. On the other hand, I didn't know if I could trust anyone right now. For all I knew, that wrecker was part of whatever operation was happening in the tunnel. But my curiosity won out. I pulled into the lot, parked beside the wrecker, and left my engine running. If things went south, I wanted to be able to leave fast. I climbed out of the cab, pulled my coat tight against the wind, and walked over to the wrecker. The snow was already ankle-deep, and the cold bit at my face like tiny needles. I knocked on the driver's side window, and after a moment, it rolled down a few inches. A man looked out at me, maybe 40 years old, with a thick beard dusted with snow. and eyes that looked tired but alert. He wore a heavy jacket with a patch on the shoulder that read, "Tolland Recovery." "Help you?" he asked, his voice rough but not unfriendly. "Maybe," I said. "I just came through the Eisenhower westbound, and I saw some things that didn't sit right with me. You been through there tonight?" His expression shifted slightly, became more guarded. "Yeah, couple hours ago. Why?" "Did you see the checkpoint? The cones? The guys in reflective vests?" He nodded slowly. "I did. Thought it was weird. State Patrol doesn't usually run checkpoints in a whiteout. Too dangerous. And those guys, they weren't asking the right questions. Just waving people through. What about the service niches? The lights?" His eyes narrowed. "You saw those too?" It wasn't a question. I nodded. "Yeah. Strobing lights, figures standing inside. What the hell is going on?" He was quiet for a moment, glancing past me at the tunnel entrance barely visible through the snow. Then he sighed, rolled the window down all the way, and said, "Get in. You're gonna freeze out there." I hesitated, but the cold was already seeping through my coat, and I needed answers more than I needed to be cautious. I walked around to the passenger side, climbed in, and shut the door. The cab was warm, almost stifling, and the heater was blasting. He turned it down slightly, then looked at me. "Name's Rafe Tolland. I run a tow service out of Frisco. Been working this stretch of highway for about 15 years. Arden Foxley. I drive freight, mostly regional stuff. Been through the Eisenhower more times than I can count, but I've never seen anything like what I saw tonight." "That's because it doesn't happen often," Rafe said. "Maybe once or twice a year, always in bad weather, always when visibility's low. I've seen it 3 times now, and every time it's the same setup. Checkpoint at the entrance, service niches lit up, figures standing around like they're waiting for something." "Waiting for what?" "An exchange," he said. "That's my best guess anyway. Someone's using the tunnel as a transfer point. Goods, money, maybe people. I don't know the details, but I know it's not legitimate. The timing's too precise, the setup's too organized. And the fact that they only do it during storms, when traffic's light and visibility's bad, tells me they don't want to be seen." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "You're saying this is some kind of smuggling operation?" "That's what I think, but I can't prove it. I tried reporting it once, called the state police, told them what I'd seen. They said they'd look into it, but nothing ever came of it. No follow-up, no investigation, nothing. Either they didn't believe me, or someone higher up told them to drop it. Or someone's being paid to look the other way," I said. Rafe nodded grimly. "That's a possibility too. This is a major transport corridor. Millions of dollars in freight move through here every day. If someone figured out how to use the tunnel for their own purposes, and if they had the right connections, they could operate for years without getting caught." I thought about the checkpoint. About the man in the reflective vest who'd barely looked at my manifest. About the way he'd warned me not to stop. Like he was trying to protect me from something. Or maybe trying to protect the operation from being exposed. "What do we do?" I asked. "We can't just let this keep happening." "No," Rafe agreed. "We can't. But we need proof. Real, solid proof. Photos, video, license plates, something that the police can't ignore." He reached into the center console, pulled out a small digital camera, and handed it to me. "I carry this for insurance claims, documenting accident scenes. You take it, go back through that tunnel, and get as many pictures as you can. I'll stay here, keep an eye on traffic, make sure no one follows you." I took the camera, felt the weight of it in my hand. "You're not coming with me?" "Can't. My rig's too obvious. Bright white, big lettering. Everyone knows me around here. If they see me poking around, they'll know something's up." But you're just another trucker making a delivery. You can blend in, get close, get what we need. I wanted to argue, wanted to say that this was insane, that I should just keep driving and forget the whole thing. But I knew he was right. If we didn't do something, this would keep happening. And maybe, eventually, someone would get hurt, or worse. So I nodded, slipped the camera into my coat pocket, and reached for the door handle. "Be careful," Rafe said. "And if you see anything that looks dangerous, anything that makes you think you're in over your head, you get out. Don't try to be a hero, just get the pictures and leave." "I will," I said, and climbed out into the snow. The drive back to the tunnel took longer than it should have. The snow was relentless, piling up on the road faster than the plows could clear it, and visibility was down to almost nothing. I kept my speed low, my hazard lights on, and followed the faint glow of the reflectors on the shoulder. By the time I reached the tunnel entrance, my hands were aching from gripping the wheel so tight, and my nerves were stretched thin. The checkpoint was still there. Same cones, same figures in reflective vests, but this time I approached differently. I slowed down, pulled into the merge lane, and as I drew closer I reached for the camera. The windows were fogged from the heater, so I cracked mine open just an inch, enough to get a clear shot, and aimed the camera at the checkpoint. I snapped 3 quick photos, capturing the cones, the figures, the tunnel entrance. Then I rolled the window back up and moved forward. The man in the vest approached, same routine as before. Flashlight in my face, quick glance at the manifest, waved me through. But this time I paid closer attention. I looked at his vest, at the reflective stripes, and noticed something I'd missed before. There was no logo, no state patrol insignia, no identifying marks. Just a plain yellow vest, the kind you can buy at any hardware store. And his coat, underneath the vest, was plain too. No patches, no badges, nothing that would identify him as official personnel. I kept my expression neutral, thanked him, and drove into the tunnel. My heart was pounding now, adrenaline flooding my system, and I had to force myself to stay calm. Focus on the task. Document everything. Get out. The service niches were still lit, still strobing in that irregular pattern. I counted them as I passed, snapping photos through the windshield whenever I could do so without slowing down too much. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each one had figures inside, sometimes 1, sometimes 2, all standing motionless. In the 4th niche, I caught a glimpse of something different. Crates, stacked against the back wall, unmarked, plain wood. I took a photo, zoomed in as much as the camera would allow, and kept driving. At the 5th niche, I saw movement. One of the figures was crouched down, doing something with the crates. I couldn't see details, couldn't make out what they were doing, but it looked like they were opening one, inspecting the contents. I slowed slightly, trying to get a better angle. And that's when the figure looked up, straight at me. For a moment, we locked eyes, or at least I think we did. It was hard to tell through the flickering light and the distance, but I felt it, that moment of recognition, of being seen. I hit the gas, pushed the rig forward, and didn't look back. My hands were shaking again, my breath coming in short bursts. I'd been seen. They knew I was watching. If Rafe was right, if this was an organized operation, then I'd just painted a target on my back. I needed to get out of the tunnel, get back to Rafe, and figure out what to do next. But as I approached the halfway point, something happened that made my blood run cold. The traffic ahead of me stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Tail lights glowing red in the darkness. Vehicles lined up bumper to bumper, going nowhere. I hit the brakes, brought the rig to a halt, and stared ahead, trying to see what was causing the backup. But I couldn't see anything, just the tunnel stretching ahead, dim lights overhead, and the unmoving line of vehicles. I grabbed the CB mic, tried to reach someone, anyone. "This is Foxley, westbound in Eisenhower. What's the holdup? Over?" Static. Then a voice, faint and distorted. "Accident ahead, lanes blocked. They're saying it could be an hour before they clear it." An hour. I didn't have an hour. I checked my mirrors, saw the headlights of another truck pulling up behind me, boxing me in. I was trapped, and if the people in those service niches decided to come check on the curious trucker who'd been taking photos, I had nowhere to go. I killed the engine, left the keys in the ignition, and sat there in the dark, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat. The camera was still in my coat pocket, warm against my chest. I had the photos, I had the evidence, but I needed to get out of here before someone realized what I'd been doing. Minutes passed. 5, then 10. The traffic didn't move. I kept checking the mirrors, kept watching the service niches in the distance, waiting for something to happen. And then I saw it. A figure, walking along the shoulder, moving from niche to niche carrying something. A flashlight, maybe. Or a radio. They were checking, making sure everything was secure, making sure no one was paying too much attention. And they were heading in my direction. I reached for the door handle, ready to run if I had to. But then the CB crackled to life. A different voice this time, calm and authoritative. "All westbound traffic, be advised. Accident's been cleared. Traffic will resume in 2 minutes. Repeat, traffic will resume in 2 minutes." I didn't wait. The moment the vehicle ahead of me started moving, I turned the key, fired up the engine, and followed. I kept my eyes forward. Didn't look at the service niches. Didn't check to see if the figure was still walking toward me. I just drove, faster than I should have, eager to get out of that tunnel and back into the open air. When I finally emerged on the western side, the snow was still falling, but it felt like relief. I pulled onto the shoulder, grabbed my phone, and tried to call Rafe. Still no signal. I sat there for a moment, trying to calm my nerves, and then I saw headlights in the mirror. A vehicle pulling up behind me, parking close. Too close. It was a pickup truck, dark blue, with tinted windows. I couldn't see who was inside, but I could feel them watching me. My heart started racing again. Were they part of the operation? Had they followed me out of the tunnel? I reached for the keys, ready to drive, but before I could, the passenger door of the pickup opened, and someone stepped out. It was Rafe. He walked over to my rig, knocked on the door, and I rolled down the window. The relief that washed over me was almost overwhelming. "Jesus," I said, "you scared the hell out of me." "Sorry," he said. "Borrowed a friend's truck. Didn't want to use the wrecker. Did you get the photos?" I nodded, pulled out the camera, and handed it to him. He scrolled through the images, his expression growing darker with each one. "This is good," he said finally. "This is really good. Crates, figures, checkpoint with no official markings. This is enough to take to the state police, maybe even the FBI." "But will they do anything?" I asked. "You said you tried reporting it before and nothing happened." "This time's different," he said. "This time we have evidence. Hard evidence. They can't ignore this." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something in the back of my mind whispered that it wouldn't be that simple. That whoever was running this operation had too much power, too many connections, too much to lose. And that people like me, people who asked too many questions, had a way of disappearing. Rafe must have seen the doubt on my face, because he leaned in closer and said, "Look, I know this is scary. I know you're taking a risk, but you did the right thing, and I'm going to make sure these photos get into the right hands. Trust me." I nodded, because what else could I do? I'd already committed. I'd already seen too much. There was no going back now. Rafe and I sat in that borrowed pickup truck for another 20 minutes, going through the photos on the camera's small screen, trying to piece together what we were seeing. The images were grainy, shot through a windshield in low light. but they were clear enough. The checkpoint with no official markings. The service niches with their strobing lights. The crates stacked against the walls. And in one photo, zoomed in as far as the camera would allow, a figure crouched beside an open crate, their hand reaching inside. "We need to get these to someone who can do something," Rafe said, scrolling through the images one more time. "Not local cops. They might be compromised. We need to go higher. State police, maybe federal." "And what do we tell them?" I asked. "That we think there's a smuggling operation happening in the Eisenhower Tunnel? Based on what? Some blurry photos and a hunch?" "It's more than a hunch," Rafe said firmly. "We both saw it, multiple times, and these photos prove that something irregular is happening in that tunnel. They'll have to investigate." I wanted to believe him, but I'd been around long enough to know that bureaucracy moves slowly, and people with power can make evidence disappear. Still, we had to try. "Okay," I said. "So, who do we contact? Do you have a name? Someone specific?" Rafe thought for a moment, then pulled out his phone. "I know someone. Road engineer with the Colorado Department of Transportation. Her name's Mireille Castor. She's based out of the Silverthorne office, handles safety inspections and structural assessments for this whole region. I've worked with her on a few accident scenes. She's straight shooter, doesn't mess around, and she has access to tunnel maintenance records, traffic logs, all the stuff we'd need to cross-reference. You think she'll believe us? I think she'll at least listen. And if she sees these photos, she'll have to ask questions." He dialed a number, put the phone on speaker, and after 3 rings, a woman's voice answered. "Tolland, it's almost 9 o'clock on a Friday night. This better be good. Mireille, I need your help. Something's happening in the Eisenhower, and I think it's serious." There was a pause, then a sigh. "What kind of something?" "The kind that involves unauthorized personnel, unmarked crates, and operations that aren't in any official records. Can you meet us? We've got photos." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "Where are you?" "West Portal Pullout, about a mile down from the tunnel exit. Give me 20 minutes." The line went dead. Rafe pocketed his phone and looked at me. "She's coming. That's a good sign." I nodded, but the knot in my stomach tightened. We were about to involve someone official, someone who might have the authority to shut this down. But that also meant we were putting ourselves on the record, making ourselves visible. If the people running this operation had the kind of connections Rafe suspected, we might be painting targets on our backs. While we waited, the snow continued to fall, heavy and relentless. I watched the tunnel entrance in the distance, a dark mouth in the mountainside, and wondered how many times this had happened before. How many drivers had passed through, seen the lights, seen the figures, and decided it was none of their business. How many had reported it and been ignored, and how many had gotten too curious and paid the price. Exactly 20 minutes later, a dark green SUV with state markings pulled into the lot and parked beside us. A woman got out, bundled in a heavy parka with the Colorado DOT logo on the shoulder. She was maybe in her late 40s with short dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that looked sharp even through the falling snow. She walked over to Rafe's window and he rolled it down. "Mireille Castor," she said, looking between Rafe and me. "You're the trucker?" "Arden Foxley," I said, leaning forward so she could see me. "All right, show me what you've got." Rafe handed her the camera, and she scrolled through the photos methodically, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she looked up at us, and I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. "When were these taken?" "Tonight," I said. "Between about 7 and 8. I went through the tunnel twice, saw the same setup both times." "And you," she said, looking at Rafe. You've seen this before? 3 times over the past 4 years. Always in winter, always during storms. I reported it once, got no follow-up. Mireille nodded slowly, handing the camera back to Rafe. Okay, I need to check something. Wait here. She walked back to her SUV, climbed in, and I saw the glow of a laptop screen through the windshield. She was typing, pulling up records, cross-referencing. We sat in silence watching her work. After about 10 minutes, she got back out and walked over, her expression darker than before. According to our maintenance logs, there was no scheduled activity in the Eisenhower tonight. No inspections, no repairs, no closures. The tunnel was supposed to be running normal operations. But there was a checkpoint, I said. Cones, people in reflective vests, the whole setup. I know, and that's what worries me. She pulled out her phone, made a call, and when someone answered, she said, "This is Castor. I need the traffic camera feeds for Eisenhower Tunnel westbound between 1800 and 2000 hours tonight. Can you pull those up?" A pause. Yes, I'll hold. She put the phone on speaker, and we waited. The snow was piling up on the windshield now, and Rafe turned on the wipers to clear it. Finally, a voice came through the phone. Male, sounding confused. "Ma'am, I'm showing a system malfunction for that time window. Cameras went offline at 1752 hours, came back online at 2014 hours. No footage available." Mireille's jaw tightened. "Both cameras?" "All 4, actually. West portal, east portal, and both interior feeds. Complete blackout." "That's not a malfunction," she said quietly. "That's deliberate." She thanked the dispatcher and hung up, then looked at us. "Someone disabled the cameras. Someone with access to our systems. Someone who knew exactly when to do it and how long they'd need. Inside job," Rafe said. "Has to be. And if they can access our systems, they can access our communications, our schedules, our personnel records, which means we need to be very careful about who we talk to and what we say." I felt a chill run through me that had nothing to do with the cold. "So, what do we do? If they're monitoring your systems, they might already know we're here talking to you." "Maybe," Mireille said, "but I pulled those records on my personal laptop, not the state network, and I called the traffic center on my personal phone. If they're watching, they'd have to be monitoring everything, which is possible but harder to do without leaving traces." She thought for a moment, then made a decision. "I'm going to copy those photos to my laptop. Then I want you both to get out of here. Don't go home tonight. Find a hotel, somewhere off the highway, pay cash if you can. I'll take this to my supervisor in the morning, along with the formal request for a federal investigation." "And what do we do in the meantime?" I asked. "Keep your heads down. Don't talk about this with anyone. And if you see anything else unusual, anything at all, you call me immediately." She handed business cards to both of us, then took the camera from Rafe and walked back to her SUV to transfer the files. Rafe and I sat in silence, the weight of what we'd uncovered pressing down on us. This wasn't just a random smuggling operation. This was organized, sophisticated, with inside help at multiple levels. And we'd just made ourselves part of the investigation, which meant we were now risks to whoever was running it. "I need to make my delivery," I said finally. "I'm already behind schedule, and if I don't show up, my dispatcher's going to start asking questions." "Then go," Rafe said. "Make the delivery, act normal, don't do anything that draws attention. I'll stay in touch with Mireille, make sure those photos get into the right hands." I nodded, but something was nagging at me. A detail I'd noticed but hadn't fully processed until now. "Rafe, when I was in the tunnel the second time, right before the traffic stopped, I saw someone walking along the shoulder, between the service niches. They were carrying something, checking on things. Did you see anyone like that when you went through? His expression shifted, became more alert. No, I saw the figures standing in the niches, but I didn't see anyone moving around. Are you sure? Positive. They were walking from niche to niche like they were doing rounds, making sure everything was secure. That means they have people actively working, not just standing guard, which means whatever they're moving, it's valuable enough to need constant supervision. He pulled out his phone, started typing something. I'm going to send Mireille a message. Tell her about the mobile personnel. That's an important detail. Mireille came back over, handed Rafe the camera. Files are transferred, I've got everything. You two need to go now. And remember, keep this quiet until I give you the all clear. We both nodded, and she got back in her SUV and drove off, her taillights disappearing into the snow. Rafe looked at me. You sure you're okay to drive? You've been through a lot tonight. I'm fine, I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. I just need to get this delivery done and find somewhere to sleep. All right, be careful. And Arden? He waited until I looked at him. Thank you for not just driving past, for giving a damn. I managed a small smile. Yeah, well, we'll see if it was worth it. I climbed out of the pickup, walked back to my rig, and got in. The cab felt cold and empty, and I cranked up the heater before pulling back onto the highway. The snow was still falling. Visibility was still terrible, but I pushed forward, following the dim glow of the road markers. My mind was racing, replaying everything I'd seen, everything I'd learned. The checkpoint, the crates, the cameras being disabled. It all pointed to something big, something dangerous. I made the delivery to Grand Junction just after midnight, backed the rig up to the loading dock and watched as the crew unloaded the medical supplies. The warehouse supervisor signed off on the paperwork, and I collected my receipt. Everything routine, everything normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone, somewhere, knew what I'd been doing. I found a small motel on the outskirts of town, paid cash for a room like Mireille had suggested, and parked my rig where I could see it from the window. The room was basic, clean but worn, with a bed that sagged in the middle and a TV that only got 3 channels. I didn't care. I just needed a place to think, to process. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled out my phone, and checked for messages. Nothing from Rafe, nothing from Mireille. I opened my logbook and added notes about the delivery, keeping everything professional and routine. But on a separate page, hidden in the back, I wrote down everything I could remember about the tunnel. Times, locations, details I might forget if too much time passed. If something happened to the photos, if the investigation got buried, I wanted to have my own record. I was about to turn off the light and try to sleep when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop asking questions. Forget what you saw. This is your only warning. My blood went cold. I stared at the screen, reading the message again, trying to figure out if it was real or if I was just being paranoid. But the timing was too specific, too deliberate. Someone knew. Someone was watching. And they wanted me to back off. I grabbed my keys, ready to leave, ready to drive. But then another text came through, this time from Rafe. Just got a weird message. Someone warning me off. Did you get one too? I typed back quickly. Yes. Just now. What do we do? His response came fast. Don't panic. They're trying to scare us. Means we're onto something. I'm calling Mireille, letting her know. You stay put, keep your door locked, don't open it for anyone. I did as he said, locked the door, checked the window, made sure my rig was still visible. Then I sat on the bed, with my back against the wall, phone in hand, and waited. Hours passed. I didn't sleep, couldn't sleep, Every sound outside made me jump. Every car that pulled into the parking lot made my heart race. But nothing happened. No one came. The night stretched on, cold and silent. At around 4 in the morning, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Mireille. Meeting with my supervisor at 0800. Federal agents will be briefed by noon. Sit tight. Do not go back to that tunnel. I texted back. Understood. Be safe. As the sky started to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I finally allowed myself to relax a little. We'd done what we could. We'd gathered evidence, reported it to someone who could act on it. Now it was out of our hands. But even as I thought that, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That whoever was running that operation wasn't going to just shut down because some trucker and a wrecker driver took a few photos. Around 7, I got another text from Rafe. Mireille says the photos match with something they've been tracking. Possible interstate trafficking ring using mountain tunnels as transfer points. FBI's taking over. She wants us to give formal statements this afternoon. Relief washed over me. We hadn't been ignored. The evidence was being taken seriously. Maybe, just maybe, we'd actually made a difference. I texted back confirmation, then got up, took a shower, and tried to prepare myself for what came next. But as I was packing my things, getting ready to check out, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The camera. Rafe's camera that Mireille had returned to him last night. It was sitting on the passenger seat of my rig, which was impossible because I hadn't taken it from Rafe. I'd left it with him. I walked out to the rig, unlocked the door, and picked up the camera. The memory card was missing. Someone had broken into my truck, left the camera, and taken the only physical evidence we had. My hands started shaking. I pulled out my phone, called Rafe. He answered on the first ring. "They got the camera," I said, my voice tight. "Someone broke into my rig and took the memory card." "Fuck." A pause. "It's okay. Mireille has copies. The files are backed up. They can't erase everything. But they know where I am. They know where my truck is. Rafe, they were in my parking lot." I know. Listen to me, Arden. Get in your rig, start driving, and meet me at the state police station in Frisco. I'm calling Mireille now, telling her we need protection. We're not doing this alone anymore." I climbed into the cab, fired up the engine, and pulled out of that parking lot faster than I should have. The snow had stopped overnight, and the roads were clearer, but I barely noticed. All I could think about was the fact that someone had been close enough to break into my truck while I slept 20 feet away. Someone who knew where I was, what I'd seen, and what I'd done. The drive to Frisco felt endless, even though it was less than 2 hours. I kept checking my mirrors, looking for vehicles that might be following me, watching for anything unusual. But the highway was quiet, traffic was light, and by the time I pulled into the parking lot of the state police station, I was exhausted and wired at the same time. Rafe was already there, standing next to his wrecker, talking to Mireille. They both looked tense. I parked, got out, and walked over. "What's happening?" "Change of plans," Mireille said. "My supervisor got a call this morning from someone higher up, federal level. They're saying the investigation's been classified and they're taking over completely, which means we can't talk about it, can't share information, and can't file formal statements until they say so." "That doesn't make sense," I said. "If they're investigating, shouldn't they want our statements right away?" "You'd think," she said grimly. "But this whole thing's being locked down tight. Makes me think it's bigger than we thought, or that someone very powerful is involved." Rafe and I exchanged a look. The warning texts, the stolen memory card, the sudden federal takeover. It all pointed to one thing. We'd stumbled onto something we were never supposed to see. And now we were stuck in the middle of it, with no idea who we could trust. We stood in that parking lot for another hour, waiting for someone to tell us what to do next. Mireille was on her phone almost constantly, talking to her supervisor, then to someone at the federal level, then back to her supervisor. Each conversation seemed to make her more frustrated, more tense. Rafe and I just waited, watching the traffic on the highway, watching the entrance to the police station, trying to figure out if we were safe or if we'd just made ourselves targets. Finally, Mireille hung up and walked back over to us. Her expression was grim. Okay, here's what I know. The FBI's opened a formal investigation into illegal trafficking operations using federal highway infrastructure. They're interested in what you saw, but they want to conduct the interviews themselves on their timeline, which means you're not giving statements to local police today. So what do we do? I asked. Just go home and wait? Essentially, yes. They'll contact you within 72 hours to schedule interviews. In the meantime, you go about your normal routines. Don't discuss this with anyone, and don't go back to that tunnel. What about the threats? Rafe asked. Someone broke into Arden's truck, stole evidence, sent us both warning messages. Are we just supposed to ignore that? I reported all of it, Mireille said. But until the feds decide how they want to handle this, there's not much else I can do. I'm sorry, I know that's not what you want to hear, but my hands are tied. I felt a surge of frustration. We'd risked ourselves to gather evidence, to expose something clearly illegal, and now we were being told to sit tight and wait. But I also understood the reality. This was bigger than us, bigger than a local investigation. If the federal government was involved, if there really was an interstate trafficking ring using mountain tunnels, then we were just small pieces in a much larger puzzle. Fine, I said. But I want protection. If someone's willing to break into my truck to steal evidence, what's to stop them from doing something worse? I'll make sure that request gets escalated, Mireille said. But honestly, the best thing you can do right now is stay visible. Stay in public places. Stay around people. Don't isolate yourself. These operations rely on secrecy. The more people who know you're asking questions, the less likely they are to make a move. It was cold comfort, but it was something. Rafe and I exchanged a look, and I could see he was thinking the same thing I was. We were on our own. Whatever protection we had would come from being smart, being careful, and not giving whoever was behind this an easy opportunity. All right, Rafe said. I'm going back to Frisco, back to work. Plenty of people around, plenty of witnesses. Arden, what about you? I've got another load to pick up in Denver, I said. I'll head back there, stay at a truck stop I know, somewhere with lots of traffic and security cameras. I'll be fine. Mireille gave us both her personal cell number, made us promise to check in with her every day, and then got back in her SUV and drove off. Rafe and I stood there for a moment longer, the weight of everything that had happened settling over us like the snow that had fallen the night before. You really think they'll investigate? I asked. Or are they going to bury this? I don't know, Rafe said, honestly, Mae. But I know we did the right thing, and if they do bury it, at least we tried. He climbed into his wrecker and drove off, leaving me alone in the parking lot. I got back in my rig, started the engine, and just sat there for a while, trying to process everything. Less than 24 hours ago, I'd been making a routine delivery, and now I was caught up in a federal investigation, receiving threats and questioning whether I'd done the right thing. I pulled out of the parking lot and headed east, back toward Denver. The drive should have been calming, the mountains beautiful even in winter, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every vehicle that pulled up behind me, every car that stayed in my mirrors for too long made my heart rate spike. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was just spooked from everything that had happened. But paranoia, I'd learned, was sometimes just pattern recognition your conscious mind hadn't caught up with yet. I made it to Denver by early afternoon and stopped at a large truck stop on the east side of the city, the kind with a restaurant, showers, and a parking lot big enough for 200 rigs. Security cameras everywhere, lighting that stayed on 24 hours a day, and enough people around that no one could approach my truck without being seen. I backed into a spot near the main building, locked the doors, and went inside to get food and check in with my dispatcher. The dispatcher wasn't happy about the delay, but I fed him a story about mechanical issues and weather conditions, and he grudgingly accepted it. He had another load for me, pharmaceuticals going to Cheyenne, pickup scheduled for the next morning. I confirmed, hung up, and bought a sandwich and coffee from the truck stop diner. Then I found a corner booth where I could see the entrance and the parking lot, and I sat down to eat. I was halfway through the sandwich when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, different from the one that had sent the threat the night before. This one just said, "Check your email." I hesitated, then opened my email app. There was a new message from an address I didn't recognize, no subject line, just an attachment. My instinct was to delete it, assume it was spam, or worse. But something made me open it. The attachment was a photo, and when I saw what it showed, my stomach dropped. It was me. Standing outside the Eisenhower Tunnel, talking to the man in the reflective vest at the checkpoint. The angle suggested it had been taken from inside one of the service niches, zoomed in, capturing my face clearly. Below the photo was a single line of text. "We know who you are." I set the phone down, my hands shaking. This wasn't just a threat. This was proof that they'd been watching me, documenting me from the very beginning. They knew my face, probably knew my name, definitely knew my truck, and they wanted me to know that they knew. I called Mireille immediately. She answered on the second ring. "What's wrong?" They sent me a photo of me at the checkpoint. They were watching from inside the tunnel. I forwarded the email to her as I spoke. This isn't just intimidation. This is targeted. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear typing in the background. "I'm seeing it. Okay, this changes things. I'm forwarding this to the federal contact immediately. This is evidence of surveillance, possibly harassment. They'll have to take this seriously. What do I do in the meantime? Stay where you are. Public place. Lots of people. I'm going to see if I can get someone from the Denver field office to meet with you today instead of waiting. This has escalated." She hung up, and I sat there in that booth, staring at the photo on my phone. The quality was too good for a phone camera, too stable for a handheld shot. This was professional equipment, probably mounted, probably part of a larger surveillance system. Which meant whoever was running this operation had resources, planning, infrastructure. This wasn't some small-time smuggling ring. This was organized, well-funded, and willing to go to significant lengths to protect their operation. 2 hours later, 2 men in suits walked into the truck stop and approached my booth. They showed me badges, FBI, and asked if I was Arden Foxley. I confirmed, and they sat down across from me. The older one, maybe 50 with graying hair and tired eyes, introduced himself as Special Agent Garrett. The younger one, 30s with a neat haircut and sharp suit, was Special Agent Lunn. "Ms. Foxley," Garrett said, pulling out a notepad. "We understand you witnessed some unusual activity in the Eisenhower Tunnel last night, and you've received threatening communications since then. We'd like to hear your account of what happened." I told them everything. The checkpoint, the service niches, the strobing lights, the figures standing inside. The photos I'd taken, the traffic camera blackout, the stolen memory card, the threatening texts, and now the surveillance photo. They listened without interrupting, taking notes, occasionally glancing at each other. When I finished, Garrett leaned back and exchanged a look with Lun. "What you're describing matches intelligence we've been gathering for the past 18 months, Garrett said carefully. "We've had reports of irregular activity in several mountain tunnels along major interstate routes. Colorado, Wyoming, Montana. Always during adverse weather, always with similar patterns. Checkpoints that aren't officially sanctioned, surveillance camera failures, and vehicles that enter but don't show up on exit logs." "So you already knew about this," I said, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. "Why haven't you shut it down?" "Because we don't know the full scope yet," Lund said. "We know something's happening, but we don't know who's running it, where the goods are coming from or going to, or how many people are involved. That's why your photos were valuable. They give us visual confirmation, specific details we can use to build a case." "Except the memory card was stolen," I pointed out. "But the engineer, Castor, made backup copies," Garrett said. "We have those files now, and combined with your testimony and the testimony of the record driver, we have enough to justify expanded surveillance and investigation." "What about protection?" I asked. "They know who I am. They've been watching me. What's to stop them from doing something more than just sending threatening messages?" Garrett and Lun exchanged another look. "We can't provide formal protective custody unless there's a direct and immediate threat to your life," Garrett said. "But we can increase patrols in areas where you're likely to be, and we can flag your information in our systems so if anything happens, response will be immediate." It wasn't much, but it was something. "What do you need from me?" "Keep doing what you're doing. Go about your normal work. But if you see anything else unusual, any other activity that matches what you saw last night, you contact us immediately." Garrett handed me a business card with a phone number handwritten on the back. "That's my direct line, day or night." They asked a few more questions, clarifying details, confirming timelines. Then they stood up, thanked me for my cooperation, and left. I watched them walk out to an unmarked sedan and drive away, and I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that someone official was taking this seriously, fear that I'd made myself a target, and doubt that any of this would actually lead to anything. I spent that night in my truck, parked under the lights of the truck stop, doors locked, phone within reach. I didn't sleep well. Every sound outside made me alert. Every vehicle that passed by made me check the mirrors. But nothing happened. No more threats, no more photos, no visits in the night. Just silence. The next morning, I picked up the load in Denver and headed north to Cheyenne. It was a straightforward run, clear weather, good roads, no drama. I made the delivery on time, collected my paperwork, and headed back to Denver. Over the next few days, I fell back into my routine, picking up loads, making deliveries, logging miles. I checked in with Mireille every day like I'd promised, and she told me the investigation was ongoing, but she couldn't share details. Rafe texted me periodically, asking how I was doing, sharing bits of information he'd heard. He said the FBI had interviewed him twice, that they seemed serious about the investigation, but he hadn't heard anything concrete about arrests or closures. It was frustrating, being kept in the dark after we'd been the ones to bring this to light. But I understood. Investigations take time, especially ones involving multiple agencies and jurisdictions. About 2 weeks after everything had happened, I got a call from Mireille. "Arden, I wanted to give you an update. The FBI conducted a major operation in the Eisenhower Tunnel last night. Coordinated sweep, multiple arrests, significant seizure of contraband." My heart leaped. "They shut it down?" "They shut down one node of it," she said carefully. "Turns out it was bigger than we thought. Multi-state operation, using several tunnels as transfer points. The Eisenhower was just one location. They arrested 9 people last night, including 2 state employees who were providing inside access. Were any of them the people I saw? The ones in the service niches? I don't know. The FBI's not releasing names or details yet, but they wanted me to pass along their thanks. Your photos and testimony were instrumental in getting the warrants they needed. I should have felt victorious. We'd uncovered something real, something dangerous, and it had led to actual arrests. But instead, I just felt tired. What about the threats, the surveillance? They're still investigating that angle. They think the people who contacted you were mid-level operatives, not the ones actually running things, which means there might still be people out there who know your name and face. That's reassuring, I said dryly. I know. But the operation itself has been disrupted. The arrests last night sent a clear message that this route isn't safe anymore. They'll likely shift to other locations, other methods, which means the immediate threat to you has probably decreased. Probably. Not definitely. Not gone, just decreased. I thanked her for the update and hung up. Then I sat in my truck, parked at yet another truck stop, and tried to figure out how I felt about all of it. We'd done something important. We'd exposed criminal activity, helped federal agents make arrests, potentially disrupted a trafficking ring that had been operating for years. But we'd also put ourselves at risk, made ourselves known to people who operated outside the law, and we'd never know for sure if we were truly safe. Over the following weeks, life slowly returned to normal. I kept driving, kept making deliveries, kept checking my mirrors more often than I used to. The FBI called me once more, asked a few follow-up questions, thanked me for my cooperation, and told me the investigation was ongoing. I asked if I could know more details, and they politely declined. Rafe and I stayed in touch, texting every few days. He told me he'd been called to testify before a grand jury, that the case was moving forward, that there might be more arrests, but he also said he'd been getting weird looks from other drivers. That word had gotten around about what we'd done, and not everyone thought we'd done the right thing. Some people thought we should have minded our own business, that snitching on truckers, even criminal ones, was a violation of some unwritten code. I understood that sentiment, even if I disagreed with it. We're a community, truckers. We look out for each other, help each other, protect each other from outside interference. But what we'd seen wasn't truckers helping truckers. It was criminals using our roads, our tunnels, our infrastructure to move illegal goods. And staying silent about that felt worse than breaking some code. About 6 weeks after the arrests, I had to make a delivery that took me through the Eisenhower tunnel again. It was the first time I'd been back since that night, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. But I had a job to do, and I couldn't avoid that route forever. So I took a deep breath, merged onto I-70, and headed west into the mountains. The approach was different this time. Clear weather, daylight, no snow. The checkpoint was gone, no cones, no reflective vests, no warnings. Just normal traffic flowing through. I entered the tunnel, and it felt ordinary. Just a long tube of concrete and rock, overhead lights humming, traffic moving at a steady pace. No strobing lights in the service niches, no figures standing in the shadows, just empty alcoves with locked doors. But as I passed through, I couldn't help looking at each niche, remembering what I'd seen. The flickering lights, the motionless figures, the crates stacked against the walls. It had been real. I hadn't imagined it. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I wondered if it was truly over, or if they'd just moved to a different tunnel, a different night, a different storm. When I emerged on the western side, I pulled onto the shoulder and sat there for a moment, letting the tension drain from my shoulders. I'd made it through. The tunnel was just a tunnel again, but it would never feel the same. Every time I drove through it from now on, I'd remember. I'd watch the service niches. I'd check my mirrors. I'd wonder. I pulled out my phone and texted Mireille. Just went through Eisenhower. Everything normal. Feels strange. Her response came a few minutes later. That's good. Means they're staying away, but stay alert. Operations like this don't disappear. They just adapt. I knew she was right, and I knew that somewhere out there, in some other tunnel or on some other route, the same thing was probably happening again. Different people, different methods, same basic operation. Using the infrastructure we all depended on to move things that should never see daylight. I thought about calling Rafe, telling him I'd been through the tunnel, but decided against it. He was probably dealing with his own aftermath, his own questions about whether we'd done the right thing. Instead, I put the phone away, started the engine, and got back on the highway. Months passed. The FBI never contacted me again. I never heard about trials or additional arrests. The story never made the news, at least not in any way that connected to what I'd seen. It was like the whole thing had been quietly swept under some federal rug, dealt with behind closed doors, kept out of public view. Maybe that was necessary for the investigation. Maybe it was to avoid panic or copycats. Or maybe it was just the way things work when powerful people are involved. I still drive trucks, still take loads through the mountains, sometimes through the Eisenhower, sometimes through other tunnels. And every single time, I watch. I look for the signs, the patterns, the things that don't quite add up. Not because I'm looking for trouble, but because now I know. I know that the roads we drive, the tunnels we pass through, the infrastructure we trust can be used for things we never imagine. And that the people running those operations are smart, organized, and very good at staying invisible. Sometimes, late at night when I'm parked at a rest stop, I think about that photo they sent me. The one showing me at the checkpoint, taken from inside the tunnel. I wonder if they still have it, if they're still watching, if they remember my face. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd just kept driving that night. If I'd ignored the strobing lights and the figures in the niches. If I'd minded my own business like so many drivers probably have. Would it have been safer? Probably. Would it have been easier? Definitely. But would I have been able to live with myself, knowing I'd seen something wrong and chosen to look away? I don't think so. I still have Garrett's business card, the one with his direct number written on the back. It's in my glove box, tucked between my registration and insurance papers. I've never had to use it, but knowing it's there makes me feel a little safer, a little less alone. And I still talk to Rafe every few weeks. We don't discuss what happened much anymore. It's become this shared experience that we both understand, but don't need to revisit constantly. Last time we spoke, he mentioned that he'd been contacted by another trucker who'd seen something similar in a tunnel in Montana. He'd passed along Garrett's information, told them to report it, but he didn't know if they ever did. That's the thing about these operations. They rely on people not talking, not reporting, not wanting to get involved. They rely on the fact that most drivers are just trying to do their job, make their delivery, and get home. They rely on silence. But some of us can't stay silent. Some of us see something wrong and can't look away. And maybe that's enough. Maybe the fact that someone is watching, someone is paying attention, someone is willing to ask questions, is enough to make these operations a little harder, a little riskier, a little less invisible. I don't know if I'll ever go through the Eisenhower again and see those strobing lights. Part of me hopes I never do, but another part of me, the part that took those photos and made those calls and refused to just drive past, that part stays ready, stays watchful, stays alert. Because I learned something that night in the whiteout. Something I can't unlearn. The road isn't always what it seems. The tunnel isn't always just a tunnel. And sometimes, The most dangerous thing you can do is assume that everything is normal, that everyone follows the rules, that the infrastructure we trust is always being used for its intended purpose. I drive with my eyes open now, really open, and I tell myself that if I ever see something like that again, if I ever witness something that doesn't sit right, I won't hesitate. I'll document it. I'll report it. I'll do what needs to be done. Even if it means getting that warning text again, even if it means seeing my face in a surveillance photo, even if it means wondering every night if someone's watching. Because some things are more important than feeling safe. Some things are more important than minding your own business. And sometimes doing the right thing means accepting that you'll never know the whole story, never get the full picture, never find out if what you did actually made a difference. But you do it anyway. The tunnel is just concrete and rock. But what happens inside it, in the dark, in the storm, when no one's supposed to be watching, that's where the real story is. And as long as I'm driving these roads, as long as I'm passing through these mountains, I'll be one of the people who watches, one of the people who remembers, one of the people who refuses to just drive past. My name is Lyle Mercer, and I've been hauling freight for 22 years. I started when I was 26, right out of the Army, needed something that kept me moving but didn't require me to take orders from anyone. Trucking fit the bill. You're on your own out there, making your own decisions, managing your own time. Sure, you've got dispatchers and delivery schedules, but once you're on the road, it's just you and the highway. I've always liked that independence, that solitude. At least, I did until that night in the Alleghenies when the road decided to take me somewhere I'd never intended to go. This happened in late October, about 3 years back. I was hauling industrial parts from a manufacturer outside Pittsburgh, headed to a plant in Harrisburg. Heavy load, precision equipment, the kind of freight that doesn't tolerate delays or rough handling. The route was straightforward, taking Route 22 east through the mountains, a road I'd driven dozens of times. It's not the most scenic drive, especially at night, but it's efficient and usually well maintained. The weather forecast had called for clear skies, light winds, typical fall conditions. Nothing that should have caused any problems. I left Pittsburgh around 6 in the evening, planning to make the delivery by midnight. Traffic was light as I headed east, mostly local commuters heading home and a few other commercial vehicles making their runs. The sun was setting behind me, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the temperature was dropping fast. By the time I reached the foothills of the Alleghenies, it was full dark, and the outside temp was hovering around 40 degrees. I had the heater running low, the radio playing classic rock at a volume just loud enough to keep me company without being distracting. The first sign that something was off came about an hour into the drive. I was climbing a long grade, the kind that makes your engine work and tests your transmission, when I saw the digital highway sign ahead. It was one of those modern LED boards that displays traffic updates, road conditions, emergency alerts. As I got closer, I could read the message. Route 22 East closed. Mile 156 to 174. Emergency repairs. Follow detour. I frowned, checked my odometer. I was at mile marker 151, which meant the closure was about 5 miles ahead. I grabbed my phone to check for updates, but there was no signal. Not unusual in this part of the mountains, the terrain plays hell with cell reception. I turned up the CB radio, listened for any chatter from other drivers, but it was quiet. Just static and the occasional burst of interference. The detour sign started appearing about a mile later. Orange arrows pointing to the right, directing traffic off Route 22 and onto what looked like an older secondary road. The pavement was rougher here, cracked and patched in multiple places, and the road narrowed significantly. The painted lines were faded, barely visible in my headlights. I slowed down, keeping an eye on the mirrors to make sure the trailer wasn't swinging too wide on the turns. The detour took me deeper into the mountains, away from the main highway, onto roads that felt increasingly isolated. I passed through a small town, maybe 3 blocks long, with a gas station that looked closed, and a diner with a flickering neon sign. No other vehicles, no pedestrians, just empty streets and the yellow glow of scattered streetlights. I kept following the detour signs, trusting that they'd eventually loop me back to Route 22. But after another 20 minutes, the signs changed. Instead of the standard orange detour markers, I started seeing older signs, the kind made of wood with painted lettering that had weathered to the point of being barely legible. One sign read, Allegheny Bore, alternate route. Another said, caution, narrow passage, reduced clearance. I didn't like the sound of that. Narrow passage and reduced clearance are not words a trucker wants to see, especially when hauling a full-size trailer. I slowed even further, downshifting to give myself more control. The road ahead curved sharply to the left, and as I followed it around, I saw something that made me hit the brakes. There was a tunnel entrance, but not like any modern tunnel I'd seen. This was old, really old. The entrance was framed by stone archways that looked like they'd been built a century ago, with crumbling mortar and vines growing up the sides. The opening was barely wide enough for my rig, and there were no lights inside, just a yawning darkness that swallowed my headlights. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to turn around, find another route, avoid this decrepit-looking tunnel altogether. But the road behind me was too narrow to turn a full rig around, and I didn't know how far back I'd have to go to find a place wide enough. Plus, if this was the official detour, then it should be safe, right? The state wouldn't direct traffic through a dangerous passage. I put the rig in gear and eased forward. The entrance was tight, and I had to keep the wheel perfectly centered to avoid scraping the sides. As I passed through the stone archway, I noticed something carved into the rock above. ABRRR, 1889. Railroad. This had been a railway tunnel, probably abandoned decades ago and later converted for vehicle use. That explained the narrow clearance and the rough stonework. Inside, the tunnel was dark and damp. My headlights illuminated maybe 50 feet ahead, revealing walls of bare rock that glistened with moisture. The ceiling was low, maybe 12 feet, which gave me just enough clearance but not much margin for error. The air smelled of mildew and old stone, with a faint metallic undertone that I couldn't quite place. The sound of my engine echoed off the walls, creating a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to fill the entire space. I kept my speed low, maybe 15 miles an hour, watching for any obstacles or structural issues. The tunnel curved slightly to the right, and as I followed it, I noticed markings on the walls. Old paint, faded to the point of being barely visible, but I could make out numbers and letters. Section 4. Clearance 12-6. Emergency exit 550. Someone had marked this tunnel for safety at some point, though the markings looked decades old. The tunnel stretched on longer than I expected. I'd been inside for at least 5 minutes, which at my speed meant I'd covered more than a mile. For a railway tunnel, that wasn't unusual, but for a detour route, it felt excessive. I checked the odometer, tried to calculate how much longer this would take, but the math didn't add up. If the closure on Route 22 was only 18 miles, this detour should have been shorter, not longer. That's when I noticed the first service alcove. It was cut into the right wall, a shallow recess maybe 8 feet deep, with a rusted metal door at the back. The door was partially open, hanging loose on its hinges, and I could see darkness beyond. I slowed even further, trying to get a better look, but the angle was wrong and I was already past it. I glanced in the side mirror, saw the alcove receding behind me, and felt a prickle of unease. A few hundred yards later, I saw another alcove. This one on the left side. Same setup, rusted door hanging open, darkness beyond. But this time, as my headlights swept past, I caught a glimpse of something inside. Something that looked like it had been piled or stacked. I couldn't tell what it was from that distance and at that speed, but it was enough to make me slow down even more. Then the tunnel forked. 2 passages, both equally dark, both unmarked except for faded paint on the walls. The left passage had an arrow pointing straight ahead with the word "through" barely visible. The right passage had an arrow and the word "service." I followed the left passage, the through route. But as I passed the junction, I glanced down the service passage and saw something that made my skin crawl. There were lights. Not modern LED lights or fluorescent tubes, but old, incandescent bulbs. Dim and flickering, strung along the ceiling of the service passage like Christmas lights. And in that dim, uneven light I could see shapes. Vehicles, maybe. Or equipment. Something large and dark, sitting in the shadows. I kept driving, told myself it was just maintenance equipment. Storage for road crews, nothing unusual. But the unease in my chest grew heavier. This didn't feel like an official detour. This felt like I'd been routed into some forgotten corner of the highway system. A place that was supposed to be closed, sealed off, left to decay. The tunnel continued, twisting and turning in ways that didn't match the straight, efficient design of modern infrastructure. I passed more alcoves, more service doors, more faded markings. Some of the doors were closed, some were open, and in one alcove, I saw what looked like old tools leaning against the wall. A pickaxe, a shovel, a coil of rope. All rusted, all covered in dust like they'd been there for years. Then I smelled it. Diesel fuel. Strong and fresh, cutting through the musty air of the tunnel. I checked my gauges, made sure I wasn't leaking, but everything looked normal. The smell was coming from outside the cab, from somewhere in the tunnel. I slowed even more, almost to a crawl, trying to locate the source. That's when I saw the niche. It was different from the alcoves I'd passed before. Larger, deeper, set back into the wall like a small room. And inside, barely visible in the glow of my headlights, was a vehicle. A box truck, white, unmarked, parked with its rear doors facing the tunnel. The doors were open, and I could see the interior was empty. No cargo, no equipment, just bare metal walls. I stopped completely, put the rig in neutral, and sat there staring at that truck. Everything about this felt wrong. Why would a vehicle be parked in a service niche inside a railway tunnel? Why were the doors open? And why could I smell diesel so strongly if the truck wasn't running? I reached for my phone, thinking I'd try to call someone, report this, get some guidance. Still no signal. I grabbed the CB mic, keyed it, and spoke into the channel. "This is Mercer, eastbound on the Allegheny Board detour. Is anyone else on this route? Over?" Static. Pure, unbroken static. I tried a few other channels, same result. The CB was working, the radio was on, but there was no one out there. Or, if there was, they weren't responding. I put the mic down and stared at that truck again. Part of me wanted to get out, take a closer look, figure out what was going on. But a bigger part of me, the part that had learned to trust my instincts over 2 decades of driving, told me to keep moving. Whatever that truck was doing there, whoever had left it, it wasn't my business. My job was to make my delivery, not investigate abandoned vehicles and forgotten tunnels. I put the rig back in gear and started moving forward. As I passed the niche, I kept my eyes on the truck in my side mirror, watching for any sign of movement, any indication that someone was nearby. Nothing, just that empty truck with its doors hanging open, sitting in the darkness. The tunnel began to slope downward, a gradual descent that made me shift to a lower gear to maintain control. The walls changed too, from bare rock to sections of brick and concrete, like different construction methods had been used in different eras. Some sections looked relatively new, maybe from the 70s or 80s when the tunnel was converted for vehicle use. Other sections looked ancient, the brickwork crumbling, the mortar falling out in chunks. I passed another service passage, this one on the right. No lights this time, just darkness. But as my headlights swept across the entrance, I saw something painted on the wall. Large letters, spray-painted in red, "No access, condemned, hazard." Below it, in smaller letters, "Authority use only, authority use only." What authority? State highway? County maintenance? Or something else? I didn't know, and I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. The sound of dripping water became more pronounced, echoing through the tunnel in a steady rhythm. Drip, drip, drip. And with it came another sound, faint but distinct. Metal on metal. A scraping sound, like something being dragged across a concrete floor. I slowed again, listening, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. But the echoes made it impossible to tell. It could have been ahead of me, behind me, or in one of the service passages. All I knew was that it was real, not my imagination, not the sound of my own rig. I kept driving, faster now, eager to get out of this tunnel and back onto a proper road. But the tunnel seemed endless, stretching on, twisting through the mountain like a maze. I checked my odometer again. I'd been inside for almost 15 minutes, which meant I'd covered at least 3 miles. That was too long. Even for an old railway tunnel, that was too long. Then, finally, I saw it. A faint glow ahead, pale and cold, like moonlight. The exit. Relief washed over me, and I pressed the accelerator slightly, eager to get out. But as I got closer, something didn't look right. The exit wasn't opening onto a road or a highway. It was opening onto another tunnel, a junction with multiple passages branching off in different directions. I hit the brakes, brought the rig to a stop, and stared at the junction ahead. This wasn't a detour. This was a network, a system of tunnels, interconnected, probably built for the railway back in the 19th century and later repurposed, forgotten, or abandoned. And I was somewhere in the middle of it, with no clear idea of how to get out. I sat there in the darkness, engine idling, staring at those branching passages, and for the first time in my 22 years of driving, I felt truly lost. I sat at that junction for a good 5 minutes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. 3 passages branched off from where I'd stopped, each one disappearing into darkness. The walls at the junction were covered in old signage, most of it so faded I could barely make out the letters. I could see fragments: East Main, West Spur, service access, railway terminology, routing instructions for trains that hadn't run through here in probably 70 years. The passage I'd come from was behind me, obviously. That left 3 choices ahead. I studied each one carefully, looking for anything that might indicate which was the correct route. The leftmost passage had a slight upward slope, which suggested it might lead back to the surface. The center passage looked level, continuing straight into the mountain. The rightmost passage sloped downward, and had what looked like water pooled at the entrance, reflecting my headlights in dark, oily patches. I chose the left passage, figuring upward was more likely to lead out than down. I eased the rig forward, keeping my speed barely above idle, watching the walls carefully for any signs of obstruction or structural failure. The passage was narrower than the main tunnel I'd been in, and I had maybe 6 inches of clearance on each side. If I met another vehicle coming the other way, one of us would have to back up, and in a rig this size, backing up in a narrow tunnel was not something I wanted to contemplate. The walls here were different. less finished, more raw. In some places I could see the marks of old drilling equipment, circular patterns scored into the rock. In other places there were support beams, thick wooden timbers that looked like they'd been in place for a century or more. Some were rotting, sagging under the weight of the mountain above. I tried not to think about what would happen if one of those beams gave way while I was underneath it. After about 10 minutes of slow, careful driving, I reached another junction. This time, there were only two choices: continue straight or turn right. There were no signs, no markings, nothing to indicate which was correct. I chose straight, purely on instinct, and kept going. The air quality was getting worse. The musty smell I'd noticed earlier was stronger now, mixed with something chemical, something that made my eyes water slightly. I cracked the window an inch, hoping fresh air might help, but there was no fresh air down here, just the same stale underground atmosphere, thick with moisture and decay. I passed another service niche, and this time I saw something that made me stop. There was a door, like the others I'd seen, but this one had a padlock on it. New padlock, chrome-plated, the kind you'd buy at any hardware store. Someone had been here recently. Someone had secured this door, which meant someone was using these tunnels for something. I got out of the cab, grabbed my flashlight from behind the seat, and walked over to the door. The padlock was definitely new, maybe a few months old at most. The hasp it was attached to was also new, bolted into the old wood of the door with modern screws. I aimed my flashlight at the door, looking for any indication of what might be behind it, and noticed something I'd missed from the cab. There were scratches on the ground in front of the door, drag marks in the dust like something heavy had been pulled in or out recently. I tried the door handle just in case, but it was locked tight. I stood there for a moment, debating whether to try to force it open, but decided against it. Whatever was behind that door, whoever had put that lock there, they'd done it for a reason. And I was already deep enough into a situation I didn't understand without making it worse by breaking and entering. I got back in the cab and kept driving. But now my mind was racing. Someone was using these tunnels. The abandoned truck, the new padlock, the drag marks, all of it pointed to active use. But for what? Storage? Smuggling? Something worse? I didn't know. And part of me didn't want to know. I just wanted to find a way out and get back to my delivery route. The passage began to widen, and I felt a small measure of relief. Wider meant I was probably getting closer to a main route, closer to an exit. But then I saw something that killed that hope. The passage was blocked. Not completely, but mostly. There was a rockfall, a pile of stone and debris that had collapsed from the ceiling and filled the tunnel from floor to about 8 feet up. Above the debris, I could see open space. A gap just large enough that I might be able to squeeze through on foot, but there was no way my rig was getting past. I stopped, killed the engine, and sat there staring at that blockage. This was bad. Really bad. I couldn't go forward, and backing up through all those junctions, all those narrow passages would take hours, and might not even lead me back to the entrance I'd come in through. I was well and truly stuck. I grabbed my phone, checked again for signal, nothing. Not even a single bar. I was too deep, too surrounded by rock and earth for any signal to reach me. I tried the CB again, cycling through every channel, calling out for anyone who might be listening. Static on every channel. I sat there for a long time, trying to think through my options. I could abandon the rig, try to climb over the rockfall and find my way out on foot. But that meant leaving a $70,000 load of industrial equipment sitting in an abandoned tunnel, which would end my career pretty much instantly. Or I could try to back out, retracing my route, hoping I could remember every junction, every turn. Neither option was good. I was still weighing my choices when I saw lights in the rearview mirror. Headlights, dim and bouncing, coming up the passage behind me. Someone else was in here. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by wariness. Who else would be driving through this forgotten tunnel network? I watched in the mirror as the vehicle approached. It was an old pickup truck, maybe from the 80s, with a rusted bed and a single working headlight. It pulled up alongside my trailer and stopped. The door opened and a man got out. He was old, maybe 75 or 80, with a weathered face and white hair under a stained baseball cap. He wore work clothes, heavy boots, and a jacket that had seen better decades. He walked up to my window, and I rolled it down all the way. He looked at me, then at my rig, then back at me, and shook his head slowly. "You're a long way from Route 22, he said. His voice was rough, like he'd spent a lifetime breathing dust and shouting over machinery. "Yeah," I said. "Followed the detour signs. Ended up in here. Now I'm stuck." He nodded, like this wasn't the first time he'd heard that story. "Name's Obadiah Kincaid. I used to work these tunnels, back when they were still active. Rail maintenance mostly. Been retired 20 years now, but I still come down here sometimes. Keep an eye on things." "Lyle Mercer," I said. "You know a way out of here?" "Depends," he said. "You in a hurry?" "I've got a delivery due in Harrisburg by midnight. I'm already 2 hours behind schedule." He glanced at his watch, a cheap digital thing with a cracked face. "It's past 10 now. You're not making midnight, son, not unless you can fly this rig." I felt my stomach sink. "There's no other way? No route around this rockfall?" "There is," he said slowly. "But it ain't official. Goes through the old bore, the original railway passage. State sealed it off years ago, said it was unsafe. But I've been through it recently. Structure's solid. You could make it if you're careful. Why would the state seal off a passage that's structurally sound?" He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see something shift behind his eyes. A calculation, a decision about how much to tell me. "Because there was an accident," he said finally. "Long time ago, 19 Freight train derailed in the old bore, killed 3 crew members. They never recovered all the cargo, and they never fully investigated what caused the derailment. Just sealed it up, rerouted traffic, and tried to forget about it." "What kind of a cargo?" "That's the thing," he said. "Nobody knows for sure. Manifest said it was industrial chemicals, but there were rumors. People who worked cleanup said some of the containers didn't match the paperwork. Said there were things in those cars that shouldn't have been there." I felt a chill run down my spine. "You're telling me I'm sitting on top of a sealed accident site with unknown hazardous materials. I'm telling you that if you want to get out of here, you've got 2 choices. Spend the next 6 hours trying to back out through the passages you came in through, or follow me through the old bore and be back on Route 22 in 30 minutes. I weighed the options. 6 hours of backing through narrow tunnels versus 30 minutes through a sealed passage. It should have been an easy choice, but something about the way Obadiah was looking at me made me hesitate. "What aren't you telling me?" He sighed, pulled off his cap, and ran a hand through his white hair. "There's things in the old bore. Not hazards, not exactly. Just things that don't add up. You might see them, you might not. But if you do, my advice is don't stop, don't investigate. Just keep driving until you're out." "What kind of things?" "The kind that make you question what you saw. The kind that sit in your memory and don't quite fit. Look, I can't make you go through there. But I've been through dozens of times and I'm still here. It's a risk, but it's a calculated one." I thought about my options. Thought about the delivery deadline I was already missing. Thought about the dispatcher who would want explanations. Thought about the isolated, forgotten tunnel network I was sitting in. And I made a decision I'd regret for a long time. "All right," I said. "Lead the way." Obadiah nodded, walked back to his truck, and got in. He pulled forward, maneuvering around my trailer, and headed back the way he'd come. I started my engine and followed, trusting that this old man, who claimed to know these tunnels, would actually get me out. We backtracked through the passage, and at the first junction, Obadiah turned right instead of the way I'd come. This passage was even narrower, and I had to fold in my mirrors to avoid scraping the walls. The ceiling lowered too, and I heard the occasional scrape of my trailer roof against rock. Every scrape made me wince, made me worry about damage to the load I was carrying. After about 10 minutes, we reached a section where the walls changed from rough rock to old brick, and there, set into the left wall, was a massive steel door. It looked like something from a bank vault, heavy and imposing, with a wheel lock mechanism and a chain wrapped around the handles. But the chain was lying on the ground, cut clean through, and the door was standing open about 2 feet. Obadiah's truck stopped in front of the door. He got out, walked back to my window. "This is the old bore. Through that door, follow the passage for about 2 miles, and you'll come out on a side road that connects back to Route 22. Should be clear sailing from there." "Should be?" "Will be," he corrected. "I came through here 3 days ago. Roads open, exits clear. What about the chain? Who cut it?" He glanced at the cut chain, then back at me. "Probably scrappers. People come down here sometimes, looking for metal they can sell. Copper wire, steel beams, anything valuable. They don't usually go far, though. Most folks get spooked and leave." "Spooked by what?" "By the dark, mostly. By the silence. By their own imaginations." He looked at me steadily. "You're not the type to spook easy, are you?" "No," I said, though I wasn't sure that was true anymore. "Good. Then you'll be fine. Follow the passage, stay on the main route, ignore any side branches. And Mercer." He paused. "If you see anything that doesn't look right, anything that makes you want to stop and investigate, don't. Just keep driving. You understand?" I nodded, though I didn't really understand. Not yet. Obadiah got back in his truck and drove through the open door, disappearing into the darkness beyond. I took a deep breath, shifted into gear, and followed him through. The old bore was different from the passages I'd been in before. Older, obviously, but also colder. The walls were brick, aged and crumbling in places, and the ceiling was lower, maybe 11 feet, which put me right at the edge of the safe clearance. The air smelled different too, not just musty but chemical, with a sharp, acrid undertone that made my throat tighten. Obadiah's truck was ahead of me, its single working headlight casting crazy shadows on the walls. I kept my distance, maybe 50 feet back, and followed his route. The passage was straight for the first quarter mile, then began to curve gently to the right. And that's when I started seeing them. The containers. They were stacked in service niches along the walls, old and rusted, each one about the size of a 50-gallon drum. Most of them had faded labels, but I couldn't read them from the road. Some had hazard symbols, the old-style diamond-shaped warnings for flammable or toxic materials. And some had no labels at all, just bare metal marked with streaks of rust and corrosion. I slowed down, trying to get a better look, but remembered Obadiah's warning. Don't stop, don't investigate. So I kept driving, but I couldn't stop looking at those containers. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, lining the walls of the old bore like forgotten cargo waiting for pickup that would never come. Then I saw the first car. Not a vehicle, a rail car. It was sitting on old tracks that ran parallel to the road, or what was left of tracks. The rails were rusted through in places, and the car itself was tilted at a sharp angle, like it had derailed and never been put right. The side was torn open, a gash maybe 10 feet long, and I could see empty space inside. Whatever cargo it had carried was long gone. Obadiah's truck kept going, not slowing, not stopping. I followed, passing 2 more derailed cars, both in similar states of decay, and then I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a body, or what was left of one, sitting in the cab of one of the rail cars, slumped against the window, skeletal and dressed in rotted work clothes. The skull was turned toward the tunnel, toward the road, and in the brief moment my headlights illuminated it, I could have sworn I saw the jaw move. I blinked, looked again, but the angle was wrong now and I couldn't see into the cab anymore. Just keep driving, I told myself. Just an optical illusion, a trick of the light and shadow. Nothing moved. Nothing's alive down here. But I couldn't shake the image. That skeletal figure, sitting in the cab like it was still waiting for rescue, still hoping someone would come. How long had it been there? Since 1987? That was almost 40 years. Why hadn't anyone removed the remains? The passage opened up into a larger chamber, and I saw more rail cars, more derailment damage. This must have been the accident site, the place where the train had gone off the tracks and crashed. There was debris everywhere, twisted metal, broken glass, scattered cargo, and in the middle of it all, Obadiah's truck, still rolling forward like none of this existed. I followed, navigating carefully around the debris, trying not to think about what I was seeing, what I was driving through. And then I saw the niche, different from the others. Larger, with a door that was standing open and light inside. Not the flickering incandescent bulbs I'd seen before, but steady, modern light. Fluorescent, maybe, or LED. And inside that niche I saw people. 3 of them standing around what looked like a workbench or table. They were wearing modern clothes, work jackets and jeans, and they turned to look at me as my headlights swept past. One of them raised a hand, not waving, just raising it, like they were acknowledging my presence, or warning me. I didn't stop. Followed Obadiah's lead, kept driving, pushed the image out of my mind. But questions flooded in. Who were those people? What were they doing down here? And why did seeing them feel more unsettling than seeing the skeletal remains in the rail car? The passage narrowed again, and we were back in the enclosed tunnel. Obadiah's truck picked up speed, and I matched him, eager to get out of this place. After another mile, maybe less, I saw light ahead. Real light. Daylight, or at least the glow of it filtering in from somewhere. Obadiah's truck burst out of the tunnel and onto a dirt road, and I followed right behind him. The fresh air hit me like a wave, cold and clean, and I sucked it in gratefully. We were out. We'd made it through. Obadiah pulled over to the side of the road and got out. I stopped behind him and climbed down from the cab. My legs were shaky and I realized my hands were trembling. Obadiah walked over, looked at me, and nodded. "You did good," he said. "Not everyone keeps their head in there." "What the hell was that?" I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. "Those people, that light, what were they doing?" "Best not to ask," Obadiah said. "Best not to know." I stood there on that dirt road, breathing hard, trying to process everything I'd just seen. The skeletal remains in the rail car, the rusted containers stacked in the niches, and those 3 people standing in the light, watching me drive past like it was the most normal thing in the world. None of it made sense. None of it fit with the story Obadiah had told me about an old train accident and a sealed tunnel. "Who were those people?" I asked again, my voice steadier this time. "Back there in that niche with the lights. What were they doing? Obadiah looked at me for a long moment, then sighed. I told you not to stop, not to look too close. Some things are better left alone. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I'm giving you. He walked back toward his truck, then paused and turned around. You made it out. You're back on the surface. That's what matters. You want my advice? Make your delivery, file a report about the detour if you feel like you have to, and then forget you were ever in those tunnels. I can't just forget what I saw. You can try. He climbed into his truck, started the engine, and rolled down the window. Route 22 is about 3 miles north of here. Turn left at the main road, follow it for 2 miles, you'll see the on-ramp. You should still be able to make Harrisburg by 2, 3 in the morning if you push it. Wait, I said, walking toward his truck. What about those containers? The ones with the hazard symbols. If there was a train derailment in 1987, shouldn't those have been cleaned up? Shouldn't someone have removed them? Obadiah's expression darkened. Should have, yes. But things don't always happen the way they should, especially when there's money involved, or liability, or both. What are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes accidents get sealed up instead of cleaned up. Sometimes it's easier to close a door and walk away than to deal with what's behind it. And sometimes people find ways to use what's been sealed up, ways that aren't official, aren't legal, but are profitable. The pieces started clicking together in my mind. The new padlock I'd seen, the cut chain on the vault door, the people with the modern lights. Someone's using that tunnel for storage or smuggling or something. Maybe, Obadiah said, but if they are, it's not my business and it's not yours. You're a trucker. You move cargo from point A to point B. What happens in sealed tunnels in the middle of the night, that's someone else's problem. It became my problem the moment those detour signs sent me down here. He looked at me with something that might have been pity. Those detour signs have been gone for months. State took them down after they finished the road work on Route 22. Whatever signs you followed, they weren't official. My blood went cold. What are you talking about? There were signs, orange detour markers, LED boards with closure information. I'm telling you, son, there hasn't been any road work on Route 22 in 6 months. And there sure as hell hasn't been any official detour through the old railway tunnels. So either you made a wrong turn somewhere and didn't realize it, or someone put those signs up specifically to route people down here. I felt like the ground had shifted under my feet. If the detour wasn't official, if the signs had been placed deliberately, then everything I'd experienced took on a different, more sinister meaning. Someone had wanted vehicles in those tunnels. Someone had created a false detour to funnel traffic through. But why? I need to report this, I said. To the police, to the State Highway Department, to someone. Obadiah shrugged. You can try, but you'll need proof. And even if you have proof, you'll need someone who's willing to listen and willing to act. That's harder than you might think. He put his truck in gear and started to drive away. I called after him. How do I find you, if I need to talk to you again? He stopped, leaned out the window. You don't. I've told you everything I can. The rest is up to you. Then he drove off, his taillights disappearing down the dirt road, leaving me standing there alone in the dark. I got back in my rig, sat in the driver's seat, and tried to think through what to do next. I could make the delivery like Obadiah suggested, and then file a report. Or I could turn around right now, drive back to that tunnel entrance, and document everything I could before someone removed the evidence. The smart play was obvious. Make the delivery, protect my job, let someone else deal with the investigation. But I've never been good at walking away from things that don't sit right. I pulled out my phone. Still no signal, but I had a camera. I could take photos, gather evidence, and then present it to the authorities once I was back in cell range. It wasn't much, but it was something. I started the engine, but instead of turning left toward Route 22, I turned right, back toward the tunnel entrance. The dirt road was rough, full of potholes and loose gravel, and I had to go slow to avoid damaging the trailer. After about 10 minutes, I saw the tunnel entrance ahead, that same opening where Obadiah and I had emerged. The massive steel door was still standing open. I parked the rig as close to the entrance as I dared, grabbed my flashlight and phone, and walked to the door. The air coming out of the tunnel was cold and carried that same chemical smell I'd noticed before. I took a deep breath, steeled myself, and walked inside. The old bore looked different now that I was on foot. Larger, more oppressive, the ceiling stretching up into darkness beyond the reach of my flashlight. I moved slowly, methodically, photographing everything. The rusted containers in the niches, the hazard symbols, the derailed rail cars. I found the car with the skeletal remains and forced myself to photograph it too, getting close enough to see the details. The clothing was rotted but still intact in places. Work overalls, steel-toed boots, a name patch on the chest that was too faded to read. I kept moving deeper, past the accident site, toward the niche where I'd seen the people with the lights. As I got closer, I could see the light was off now. The niche was dark. I approached, cautiously, flashlight raised, not sure what I'd find. The niche was maybe 20 feet deep and 15 feet wide, carved out of the rock with the same precision as the others. But this one had been actively used. There was a generator in the corner, still warm to the touch. Work lights mounted on stands. A folding table with papers scattered across it. And against the back wall, stacked on pallets, were crates. Wooden crates, unmarked, sealed with metal bands. I photographed everything, then examined the papers on the table. Most of them were handwritten notes, difficult to read in the beam of my flashlight, but I could make out fragments. Shipment 14. Confirmed. Route secure. Next transfer. Thursday. Payment received, $40K. This was definitely illegal activity. Smuggling, probably using the sealed tunnel as a hidden transfer point. I was so focused on the documents that I didn't hear the footsteps until they were close. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and found myself facing someone. A man, maybe 40, wearing work clothes and a jacket. He had a flashlight of his own, and in his other hand, something that made my stomach drop. A radio. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. His voice was calm, almost conversational, which somehow made it more threatening. "I got lost," I said, trying to keep my own voice steady. "Followed a detour, ended up in the tunnels. I'm just trying to find my way out." "With a camera?" He nodded at the phone in my hand. "Taking pictures of things that don't concern you?" "I'm documenting my route, in case I need to explain the delay to my dispatcher." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "That's creative. But we both know that's not true. You've been poking around, asking questions, taking photos of things you shouldn't even know exist. That's a problem. Look, I don't want any trouble. I'll delete the photos, I'll leave, and I won't say anything to anyone." "You're right about one thing," he said. "You're going to leave, but first, you're going to give me that phone." I backed up a step, calculating my options. I was bigger than him, probably stronger, but he had a radio which meant he could call for help, and I was deep in a tunnel with only one way out. Fighting wasn't smart, running wasn't smart, but giving up the only evidence I had wasn't smart either. "I can't do that," I said. He raised the radio to his mouth, pressed the button. "Got a situation in Section 4, need backup." The response came immediately, a voice crackling through static. "Copy. 5 minutes out." 5 minutes. I had 5 minutes to get out of this tunnel and back to my rig before this got a lot worse. I made a decision. I turned and ran. Behind me, I heard him shout. Heard footsteps following, but I had a head start and I was motivated. I ran through the tunnel, flashlight beam bouncing wildly, my boots pounding on the broken pavement. I passed the derailed cars, past the containers in the niches, ran like my life depended on it, because maybe it did. I burst out of the tunnel entrance and sprinted to my rig, climbed in, fired up the engine, and threw it into gear. As I pulled away, I saw headlights in the tunnel behind me, vehicles approaching fast. I didn't wait to see who it was. I just drove, pushing the rig harder than I should have on that rough dirt road, desperate to reach the main highway. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes, I saw pavement. Real pavement, marked lanes, a proper road. I merged onto it and headed north, away from the tunnel, away from whatever I'd stumbled into. My hands were shaking on the wheel, my heart hammering in my chest, but I kept driving. I found Route 22 exactly where Obadiah had said it would be, took the on-ramp, and headed east toward Harrisburg. As the miles passed and no one appeared in my mirrors, I started to relax slightly. I'd gotten out, I'd gotten away. And I still had the phone with the photos. But I knew this wasn't over. Someone had set up a fake detour to funnel people into those tunnels. Someone was using a sealed accident site for illegal activity, and someone had just threatened me for discovering it. I needed to report this, but I needed to be smart about how I did it. I pulled off at the next rest area, parked under the lights where there were other trucks and plenty of visibility, and called 911. When the dispatcher answered, I asked for the state police and was transferred. An officer came on the line, identified himself as Trooper Hollis, and asked what my emergency was. I told him everything: the detour signs that shouldn't have been there, the tunnel network, the old train accident site, the people using it for smuggling, the confrontation. When I finished, there was a long pause. "Sir, where are you right now?" "Rest area on Route 22, about 40 miles west of Harrisburg. Stay there. I'm dispatching someone to take your statement. Don't leave. Don't talk to anyone else, understood?" Understood. I sat in my rig, engine off, watching the parking lot. About 20 minutes later, a state police cruiser pulled in and parked near me. An officer got out, a woman, maybe in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She walked over to my window and I rolled it down. "Lyle Mercer?" "That's me." "Deputy Hester Duvall. I'm with the State Police Criminal Investigation Unit. Trooper Hollis forwarded your call to me. Can you step out of the vehicle?" I climbed down, and she led me to a picnic table near the rest area building. We sat down, and she pulled out a notebook and the recorder. "I'm going to record this conversation. Do you consent?" "Yes." She started the recorder, noted the date and time, and then looked at me. "Tell me everything." I went through it again, more slowly this time, with more detail. She took notes, asked clarifying questions, and when I mentioned the photos, she asked to see them. I handed her my phone, and she scrolled through the images, her expression growing more serious with each one. "These containers," she said, pointing at one of the photos. "Did you get close enough to see what was in them?" "No, most were sealed, but the hazard symbols suggest chemicals, maybe industrial waste. And these crates in the niche, the ones on the pallets? Sealed too, but there were documents on the table. Looked like shipping logs or transfer records." She zoomed in on the photo of the documents. "Can you read any of this?" Some of it mentioned shipments, transfers, payments. Looked like records of illegal transactions. She nodded, made more notes. "And the man who confronted you. Can you describe him?" I gave her the best description I could. Height, build, approximate age, clothing. She wrote it all down, then looked up at me. Mr. Mercer, what you've stumbled into is potentially a major criminal operation. Using sealed infrastructure for smuggling is not uncommon, but it's usually small scale. What you're describing sounds organized, well-funded, and dangerous. These people don't like witnesses. I figured that out when he tried to take my phone. You did the right thing calling us, but I need you to understand something. This investigation is going to take time. We'll need to verify your account, obtain warrants, coordinate with multiple agencies. In the meantime, you need to be careful. Don't talk about this with anyone. Don't post those photos online. And if you see anything suspicious, anyone following you, you call me immediately. She handed me a business card. You think they'll come after me? I think they're going to want to know who you are and what you saw. Whether they act on that depends on how much risk you represent to their operation. But we'll be monitoring the situation, and we'll have patrols in areas where you're likely to be. That's not exactly reassuring. It's the best I can offer right now. Make your delivery, go about your normal work, and stay alert. I'll be in touch as soon as we have more information. She copied the photos from my phone to her own device, gave me back my phone, and told me I was free to go. I climbed back into my rig and sat there for a while trying to process everything. I'd done the right thing. I'd reported what I'd seen, provided evidence, cooperated with law enforcement. But I didn't feel safe. I felt exposed. I made the delivery to Harrisburg around 3 in the morning, unloaded the industrial equipment, collected my paperwork, and found a truck stop to rest. I didn't sleep well. Every sound outside made me alert. Every vehicle that parked near me made me check the mirrors. But nothing happened. No confrontations, no threats, no visits in the night. Over the next few days, I tried to return to my normal routine. Picked up loads, made deliveries, logged miles. Deputy Duvall called me once, said the investigation was ongoing, but she couldn't share details. She asked if I'd noticed anything unusual, anyone following me. I hadn't, but I told her I'd stay vigilant. About 2 weeks after everything had happened, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Hello? Mr. Mercer? A man's voice, unfamiliar. My name is Agent Parsons. I'm with the FBI. We'd like to talk to you about your experience in the Allegheny railway tunnels. The FBI? This was bigger than I'd thought. I already gave a statement to Deputy Duvall. I know, we've reviewed it, but we have some additional questions and we'd like to show you some materials to see if you can identify anyone. We arranged to meet at a field office in Pittsburgh the following day. When I arrived, Agent Parsons was waiting with 2 other agents and Deputy Duvall. They led me to a conference room and showed me photographs. Surveillance photos, mugshots, driver's license photos. I looked through them carefully and pointed out the man who'd confronted me in the tunnel. That's him, the one with the radio. Parsons nodded, made a note. His name is Derek Milhouse. He's been on our radar for about 3 years. Low-level smuggler, usually moves stolen goods, occasionally dabbles in more serious contraband. But he's always been small-time. If he's involved in what you saw, it means the operation is bigger than we thought. What exactly are they smuggling? We don't know yet. Could be drugs, could be weapons, could be stolen industrial equipment. The railway tunnel system gives them access to multiple states, makes it easy to move things without going through official checkpoints, and the fact that the tunnels are officially sealed means no one's monitoring them. Except Obadiah, I said. The old man who helped me get out. He said he keeps an eye on things. Duvall and Parsons exchanged a look. We'd like to talk to him, Parsons said. Do you know how to reach him? No, he said I wouldn't be able to find him. Just told me his name was Obadiah Kincaid. Said he used to work rail maintenance. Duvall pulled out her phone, typed something, then frowned. Obadiah Kincaid, retired railway maintenance worker. died in 2003. I stared at her. That's not possible. I talked to him. He led me through the tunnel. He was driving a truck. I'm looking at his obituary right now. Died of a heart attack, age 78 in 2003. That's 22 years ago. The room went silent. I replayed the conversation in my mind, tried to remember details. He'd seemed old, sure, but alive, real. He'd driven a truck, talked to me, given me directions. He couldn't have been dead for 22 years. Are you sure? I asked, though I knew it was a stupid question. She wouldn't have brought it up if she wasn't sure. Positive. But it's possible someone else is using his identity, maybe someone who knew him, worked with him. It's a lead we'll follow up on. But I could see the doubt in her eyes. The same doubt that was creeping into my own mind. What if Obadiah hadn't been real? What if he'd been something else? A hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. A ghost, if you believed in such things. Or something stranger, something that didn't fit into any category I understood. The meeting continued for another hour. They asked more questions, showed me more photos, took copies of my phone records and GPS logs. When it was over, Parsons thanked me for my cooperation and told me they'd be in touch. As I was leaving, Deputy Duvall pulled me aside. Mr. Mercer, I want to be straight with you. This investigation is complicated. There are jurisdictional issues, questions about who has authority over sealed federal infrastructure, and concerns about officer safety if we try to raid those tunnels without proper preparation. It's going to take months, maybe longer, before we can move on this. So, in the meantime, they just keep using it? We'll increase patrols in the area, try to identify vehicles coming and going, build a case. But we can't just shut down miles of tunnel without proper legal authority and tactical planning. And what about me? Am I just supposed to wait and hope they don't decide I'm too much of a risk? We're monitoring the situation. If we see any indication that you're in danger, we'll act. But honestly, the fact that nothing's happened yet suggests they might be laying low, reassessing their security. You reported what you saw, but you don't have any information that could directly identify the people running the operation. That makes you less of a threat. It wasn't the reassurance I'd hoped for, but it was something. I thanked her and left. Months passed. The FBI never called back. Deputy Duvall checked in occasionally, always with the same message. Investigation ongoing, no updates to share. I kept driving, kept working, but I never took a route that went anywhere near the Alleghenies. Not because I was told to avoid it, but because I couldn't shake the memories. The smell of that tunnel, the skeletal remains in the rail car, the people standing in the light, watching me drive past. And Obadiah, who might or might not have been real, leading me through the darkness. I tried looking up more information about him online. Found a few obituaries, some records from the railway company he'd worked for, but nothing that helped me understand what I'd experienced. Nothing that explained how a man who'd been dead for 22 years had driven a truck and given me directions. I also started noticing things, small things, things that didn't quite add up. Like the fact that my GPS log from that night showed a gap, a 3-hour window where my signal had dropped completely. Or the fact that when I checked my phone records, there was no record of the call I'd made to 911 from inside the tunnel, even though I clearly remembered making it. It was like part of that night had been erased, or had never happened at all. One night, about 6 months after everything had happened, I was at a truck stop in eastern Pennsylvania, talking to another driver over coffee. We got on the subject of strange experiences on the road, the kind of stories truckers tell each other late at night when there's nothing else to do. I told him about the detour, the tunnels, the things I'd seen. I didn't expect him to believe me, but he listened carefully, and when I finished, he nodded slowly. I've heard stories about those tunnels, he said, from other drivers, people who've been in the business longer than me. They say there's places in the Alleghenies where the roads don't go where they're supposed to, where you can take a wrong turn and end up somewhere that shouldn't exist. And sometimes you meet people who help you, guide you out. But later, when you try to find them, try to thank them, you can't. Because they were never really there. You think I hallucinated it? I think there's things on the road that don't fit into neat categories. Things that happen at night, in tunnels, when you're alone and tired and maybe not thinking as clearly as you should be. Whether they're real or not, I can't say. But they're real enough that people remember them. Real enough that they change how you drive, how you think about the road. I've thought about his words a lot since then. About the nature of reality. About what's real and what's not. About the thin line between the two. I don't know if Obadiah was a ghost, a hallucination, or something else entirely. I don't know if those tunnels were really being used for smuggling, or if I saw something that was meant to stay hidden. The FBI never made any arrests that I heard about. The tunnel system was never officially investigated, at least not publicly. But I know what I saw. I have the photos still, saved on multiple devices, backed up to the cloud. I have the business card Deputy Duval gave me, tucked in my wallet. And I have the memories, clear and sharp, refusing to fade even as the months turn into years. I still drive trucks, still haul freight across Pennsylvania and beyond, but I'm more careful now about which routes I take, which detours I follow. When I see signs directing me off the main highway, I look for official markings, for state logos, for anything that confirms they're legitimate. And if I can't find that confirmation, I keep driving, even if it means adding hours to my route. Because I learned something that night in the Allegheny tunnels. I learned that not every road leads where it's supposed to, that not every passage is what it appears to be, and that sometimes the people who help you might not be people at all. I haven't been back to those tunnels, haven't tried to find that dirt road where Obadiah dropped me off, haven't looked for the entrance to the old bore. Part of me wants to go back with proper equipment and witnesses and document everything. But a bigger part of me knows that's a mistake. Whatever is in those tunnels, whether it's criminal activity or something stranger, it's been there a long time, and it will probably be there long after I'm gone. Sometimes, late at night when I'm parked at a rest stop, I think about the detour signs, the ones that led me into the tunnels, the ones that Deputy Duval said didn't exist. I wonder if they're still there, waiting for the next driver who's running behind schedule, who's tired and not paying close attention, who's willing to follow arrows into the dark. And I wonder if Obadiah is still down there too, in his old pickup truck with the rusted bed and the single working headlight. Still keeping an eye on things. Still helping lost drivers find their way out. Still existing in that strange space between what's real and what shouldn't be possible. The road has its secrets. The tunnels have theirs. And some questions, I've learned, are better left unanswered. But I keep that business card in my wallet. And every few months I send Deputy Duval a text, just checking in, just reminding her that I'm still out here, still driving, still watching. She always responds the same way. Investigation ongoing. Stay safe. And I do. I stay safe. I stay alert. And I stay away from detours that lead into darkness. Because some roads, once you've been down them, you can never really leave behind.